Welcome to the June 2024 Ordinary Council meeting. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio recording of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to turn off mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, we turn to item 1, which is the declaration of opening, and I declare the meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Item 2 is a disclaimer. The City of South Perth disclaims any liability for any loss arising from any person or body relying on any statement, discussion, recommendation or decision made during this meeting. Item 3 is announcements from the presiding member. That's me, but there's no such announcements this evening. Item 4 is attendance. Item 4.1 is apologies. I haven't received any apologies for this evening. Item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence, and that is nil for this evening. Item 5 is declarations of interest. I've received a declaration of financial interest by CEO Mike Bradford in item 10.5.1, as this item relates to my contract of employment. Councillors, does anyone else have a declaration of interest that they wish to make this evening? And I'm going to take that as a no. So, moving on. Item 6 is public question time. Item 6.1 is responses to previous public questions taken on notice. That's nil for this evening. Item 6.2 is public question time itself. So I now open public question time at 2 minutes past 6 p.m. We have received 2 written submissions prior to tonight's meeting. I would ordinarily start by inviting Mr. Barry Drake of South Perth to the microphone, but I'm not sure he's actually here. Mr. Drake, are you in the lobby by any chance? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Drake isn't here. In that case, I'll invite Ms. Joanne Ord of Como. If you'd like to come to the microphone, welcome to you, and we look forward to your questions.
This is on?
It is, yes.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. There's no real preamble per se. These are just general sort of funds questions. So the first relates to the capital program highlights for the financial year 24-25 and refers to their $5.5 million federal funds retained from the RAF to be utilised across various reserves across the city for sports lighting and change rooms. So I note that Richardson Reserve will receive almost 1.6 in upgraded sports lighting, along with approximately 740 of all gender change room upgrades. And Collier Reserve has been allocated 740 for these all gender change rooms, 635 of which is for additional change rooms. Could you please explain the rationale behind the allocation of these funds towards these 2 reserves in particular, and provide details of how the existing building at Collier will alter to accommodate the additional change room facilities?
Thank you for the question. Ms. Amprimo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Collier Reserve was identified as a site with capacity to accommodate additional usage that could target female participation if there were suitable facilities at the reserve. The existing facility is proposed to have minor modifications so they are gender neutral, such as gender neutral toilets and showers. A new change room is proposed that would be suitable for use by any gender. The identification of this site predated the council decision related to the WASPs potentially relocating to Collier Reserve. Given a decision is yet to be made on WASPs relocating, and given the funding agreement included Collier Reserve, funding has still been allocated for this reserve. And Richardson Reserve was identified as a site that lacked sufficient change rooms to accommodate female teams on all of the facilities, and the increase in lighting standard will provide a high standard facility for use in that area.
Thank you, Ms. Amprimo. Your second question, Ms. Ord?
Thank you. Yeah, number 2. During public question time of the February ordinary meeting this year, the City was asked if their 10-year financial plan included funds for capital works associated with the proposed hockey facilities at Collier, and the response was no. Upon review of the schedule of capital outlays in the enclosed 10-year plan, it isn't immediately apparent if funds have been allocated, although there are notable increases in capital outlays planned for financial years 24-25 through 27-28 for buildings, roads and recreation/parks. So could the City please provide detail on these projected outlays and confirm if their response provided at the February meeting remains the same?
Thank you. Ms Ambrema?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There are no funds specifically allocated to support hockey facilities. The City included the change rooms at Collier Reserve prior to the notice of motion relating to WASP's lease option. A list of the projects included in 24-25 can be found in the annual budget report on pages 32 to 35.
Thank you, Ms Ambrema. And your final question, Ms Ord?
Yeah, number 3. Since the feasibility study was received last year, has the City established an order of magnitude of capital funds and associated scope of works that would be required to facilitate hockey at Collier Reserve? And if so, what is that estimate and scope?
Thank you. Ms Ambrema?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, the City has not.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms Ambrema, and thank you, Ms Ord, for the questions. Now, Mr Drake doesn't seem to be here, so him being the only other person that submitted questions prior to the meeting, I'll just check with governance and see if there were any late questions in the tray. No, there's not. Okay. In that case, I now close public question time at 6 minutes past 6 p.m. That brings us to item 7, which is the confirmation of minutes and notes. Item 7.1 is minutes, and item 7.1.1 is the ordinary council meeting held 28 May 2024. So I'm about to seek a mover and a seconder for the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held 28 May 2024 to be taken as read and confirmed as a true and correct record. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Coveney, thank you. A seconder? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Councillors, does anyone oppose this item? No. Okay. Then I'll declare that item carried using my powers under the standing orders. Item 7.2 is notes of briefing, and I'm about to look for a mover and a seconder to move that council notes that the following briefings and workshops were held. That's 7.2.1, concept briefings and workshops, and 7.2.2, council agenda briefing, 18 June 2024. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Coveney, and seconded by Councillor Navard. Councillors, does anyone oppose this? No. Then I'll use my powers under the standing orders to declare that carried. That brings us to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.1 is petitions. There's nil this evening. Item 8.2 is gifts or awards presented to council. Again, that's nil this evening. Item 8.3 is deputations, and a deputation was heard at the council agenda briefing held on 18 June 2024. That brings us to item 9 on the agenda, which is the method of dealing with agenda business. And I'll now seek confirmation from the Chief Executive Officer, Mr Mike Bradford, that all the report items contained in tonight's agenda were discussed at the June council agenda briefing. Mr Bradford.
That is correct, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. So, with the exception of those items to be withdrawn for discussion, reports will be adopted by exception resolution. And by this, I mean that the officer recommendations will be adopted as is, without discussion or amendment. The following items have already been withdrawn for discussion this evening. Those items are 10.4.1, entitled Adoption of the Annual Budget 2024-2025 and Long-Term Financial Plan. The reason for that is an absolute majority is required. Councillor Nick Coveney has an amended motion on this item, and Councillor Mary Choi has an amended motion on this item. Item 10.4.3, entitled City of South Perth Fencing Local Law. The reason for that is Councillor Glenn Cridland has an amended motion on this item. Item 10.4.4, Corporate Business Plan 2024/25, to 2027/28. The reason for that is an absolute majority is required, and Councillor Mary Choi has an amended motion. Item 10.5.1, entitled CEO Performance Review Process and KPI Setting. The reason for that is CEO Mike Bradford has declared a financial interest in this item, and an absolute majority is required for paragraph 3 of that motion. Also, 10.5.6, which is an annual review of council delegations, and the reason for that is an absolute majority is required. Councillors, does anyone wish to withdraw any other items for discussion this evening? Councillor Waugh.
Can I please withdraw item 10.3.1? I intend to move a deferral motion.
10.3.1 is being withdrawn. That is entitled Proposed Scheme Amendment Number 1 to Local Planning Scheme Number 7, Additional Use, open bracket, office, close bracket, Lot 3, number 151, Angelo Street, South Perth. Okay. Councillors, any other items to be withdrawn this evening? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Yes, it's item number 10.4.6, monthly financial statements for May.
All right, so we're also withdrawing item 10.4.6, entitled Monthly Financial Statements, May 2024. Any others, councillors? No, okay. All right, so give me a moment. I'm just going to update my run sheet to reflect those withdrawals. Okay, so I'm about to call for a mover and a seconder to carry the following items by exception resolution. Those items are 10.4.2, City of South Perth Cats Local Law 2024, 10.4.5, Listing of Payments, May 2024, 10.5.2, Internal Audit Report, Asset Management Maturity Review, 10.5.3, Quarterly Activity Report, 10.5.4, Audit Register Progress Report, third quarter update, and 10.5.5, Policy Review. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Someone to second. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Councillors, does anyone oppose these items? That's a no. Okay. So, those items have just been passed by exception resolution in accordance with clause 5.5 of the City of South Perth Standing Orders Local Law 2007, and the officer's recommendations have been accepted by council. We'll now be moving on to those reports identified to be withdrawn for discussion, the first of which is item 10.3.1, entitled Proposed Scheme Amendment Number 1 to Local Planning Scheme Number 7, Additional Use Office, Lot 3, number 151 Angelo Street, South Perth. We have an officer recommendation before us. I haven't received any amended or alternative motions, but Councillor Waugh has indicated, Councillor Waugh has indicated that she intends to move a deferral. Councillor Waugh, if you can... May I ask a question before we begin this one? Far away.
In May 2023, an application for a proposed cafe restaurant addition to multiple dwellings at Lot 174, number 60 Elizabeth Street, South Perth, which is effectively at the end of Lawler Street, was recommended by the City for approval. In the June 2024 agenda, we have a property at 151 Angelo Street seeking a change of use that has not been recommended by the City for approval, and this property is also in proximity to Lawler Street. The City report on this occasion is to reject the proposal because the activity area is further along Angelo Street in the vicinity of Coode Street.
Councillor Novart, I'm just going to cut in here. The standing orders do say that questions have to be concise and succinct.
Here we go.
What is the question?
The question is, would the City please clarify for the community why the City recommendation differed in each of these circumstances when both activities would have represented activation away from the designated area of Angelo Street?
I'll just seek some assistance from Mr Adams here. That question is very much getting into the substance of the motion, but we haven't actually moved and seconded the motion. Is that one that we can have answered at this point in time? All right, I'll allow it. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So when council considered the Sea Container Cafe, that was considered a cafe restaurant under the then Town Planning Scheme number 6, and that was a discretionary use with consultation. So the city was able to undertake that assessment and prepare the report and recommendation to council. The proposal for an office is an X use under the residential zone within the now operative local planning scheme number 7, which means we cannot consider an application for an office.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi, I assume you're raising your hand for a question?
Yes, if I may, as well.
Okay, but I do remind councillors that the item hasn't actually been moved and seconded. And I'll listen to the question, but I reserve the right to either allow it or not.
Sure. Just wondering what the potential implications are, if any, of the council commencing down the path of potentially approving offices and home businesses in residential zoned areas, and what the differences are between the two, including in terms of their impact on residents, please.
Ms Shaw, can I send that your way?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So if council was to approve a scheme amendment for this purpose, it would provide for an office land use to be considered and approved within the residential zone. We would consider each application on a case-by-case basis if we received any future applications for offices in the residential zone. In terms of a home business, under the land use definition, it's capped at a maximum of 50 square metres, and it has a maximum number of employees that can be employed at that business, which differs from an office, which has an unlimited floor space or cap on employees. And that obviously has wider ranging impacts in terms of traffic and amenity.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Now, Councillor Waugh, you're moving a deferral, I understand. Would you like to move that deferral now?
Yes, please, thank you.
All right, I'll see if there's a seconder, but just a reminder to all councillors, because this is a procedural motion, there will be the opportunity for Councillor Waugh to give us the reasons as to why she's moving a deferral, but other than that, there won't be any debate. We'll simply go straight to the vote on the deferral. So would anyone like to second this deferral motion? Councillor Cridland. Councillor Waugh, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I understand at the agenda briefing last week there was a deputation on behalf of the applicant, and as part of that deputation there was a request for a deferral to enable the applicant to submit additional information. Now, I do not know whether the additional information will have any impact or bearing upon the officer recommendation, but I do know that people always like to be heard, and that I don't consider that there's any prejudice to the council in deferring to provide the applicant the opportunity to state their case and to be heard. So I move to defer for 1 month.
All right, thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillors, there's no debate on this motion. I'm simply going to put the deferral for 1 month to the next ordinary council meeting to the vote. Please cast your votes. All right, so the motion to defer this item for 1 month has been lost, 4 votes to 5. And for those of you who are listening via YouTube, we are trialling a new system. Those who voted in favour of the deferral were Councillor Cridland, Councillor Navard, Councillor Prendeville and Councillor Waugh. Those who voted against were Councillor Brent, well, we've just lost that, but everyone else, effectively. We're still ironing out some new kinks on the new system here. So we proceed to the substantive motion. As I said before, we have an officer recommendation before us. I haven't received any alternative motions or amended motions. Would anyone like to move the officer recommendation? All right, I guess I'll move it. Does anyone wish to second? Councillor De Souza, thank you. Councillors, I don't have a lot to say on this item. The officer recommendation and the officer report was pretty clear to me. I get why the applicant might be keen on the proposal, but really, I'm not a big fan of playing patchwork quilts with our town planning schemes on a lot-by-lot basis. That doesn't strike me as being in line with the reasons that we've passed the local planning scheme number 7. That's all I've got to say. Councillor De Souza?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I do understand what Councillor Waugh was trying to do, and it's obviously important for the applicants to have a fair hearing. But I just think on this one, to go for a scheme amendment when we've just gazetted our planning scheme a few months ago is a bit of the nuclear option. And I think making the office designation in residential zones is potentially a precedent. Personally, I wouldn't want to see set. So for those reasons, I'll be supporting this particular report.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation? No? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favour? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, just quickly, for the reasons there's already been said mainly by Councillor D'Souza, and also for the responses that Director Shaw, thank you, just provided to my question at the beginning, prior to the deferral, I will be supporting the officer recommendation on this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coveney, speaking for or against?
For, thank you, Mr Mayor. For the recommendation of the administration. Look, I think it's a slippery slope argument, which is that if you approve this, then why not others? We've got designated precincts, and my concern is that the more and more you let these things fly, you take people away from our designated precincts.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Does anyone else wish to speak either for or against the officer recommendation? No. Councillor Quidland.
I've never been a fan of spot zoning. I don't think it's generally a good way of planning, and I simply was willing to give them one more month to come up with something a bit more compelling. But the meeting has decided not to, so I think it's a cogent report and cogent reasons given for not proceeding with the scheme amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Credland. Does anyone else wish to speak either for or against? No. No one's spoken against the officer recommendation, so there's no need for me to wind up. I'll simply put the officer recommendation to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. I think I'm waiting on one more vote. Still waiting on one more vote. Councillors, I hope it's not me, but if everyone could just have another go at it. There we go. All right, it's come through. That was unanimous. Thank you all. We're moving on to the next item, which is item 10.4.1. Adoption of the annual budget 2024/25 and long-term financial plan. I'm happy to move this one. Is anyone wanting to second? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Okay. Councillors, I'm very pleased to move this budget. We've been through 4 budget workshops together with the City Administration, and I'm confident that the budget makes proper provision for the essential services that our community relies upon, whilst honouring Council's commitment to keep rates movements either at or below inflation. I'm particularly pleased by this budget because it's the first city budget that I'm aware of that provides for an operating surplus. The city did generate an actual operating surplus last financial year, and we're on track to generate another operating surplus this financial year, but this is the first time in a very long time that the city is actually providing for an operating surplus in its annual budget. Why is this important? Why should we care whether or not the city is generating operating surpluses or not? And the answer, as we all know, is the $800 million in public assets that we manage for the benefit of our community. Almost all of those assets necessarily have a limited life and will inevitably require replacement or renewal at some stage. The budget allocates $26.6 million in capital spending, 81% of which is focused on renewal of existing assets. And by way of comparison, the capital budget for the current financial year that's just about to come to a close, 2023/24, was $14.8 million. So we are proposing a particularly large capital budget for 2024/25. And the projects chosen in that capital budget have been very carefully prioritised to ensure that our residents and our ratepayers across our entire district get maximum value for money. Not everything has made the cut, and not everything can make the cut. We all know that. It was made abundantly clear during the budget workshops and was reinforced by the city officers at last week's council agenda briefing. The capital works budget of 2024/25 is not only constrained by the available funds, but it's also constrained by the capacity of the city's workforce to physically carry out the budgeted capital works within a 12-month period. One of the most important jobs that we have as a council is to prioritise which works should be carried out when, and we should absolutely be willing to rely on expert advice in making that assessment. I'm confident that this budget focuses on the correct priorities and keeps us moving in the right direction. The work is not done yet, but we've turned what were consistent operating deficits into operating surpluses, and we're restocking our financial reserves. We're spending more on asset maintenance, replacement and renewal than I think we ever have before, and we're still rolling out new infrastructure for the benefit of our community, like the new change rooms at our major sporting reserves, like the Manning bike track, and like the 2 new enclosed dog parks, as well as CCTV, public lighting, and other projects to improve community safety. Councillors, I'm confident that with this budget, we are delivering on our community's priorities, and we're doing it without a rates movement in excess of Perth inflation for the 6th consecutive year now. This budget is something that I think everyone can be proud of, elected members and city staff alike. As far as I'm aware, the financial management of the city has never been better than what it is right now, and that is a credit to everyone who has assisted in getting us to where we are now. It's definitely not an easy job, I can't stress that enough, but I particularly want to thank Mr Bradford, Mr Adams, Mr Lecoq, and all the city staff who have contributed to this budget. There is, however, more to do. As you know, we're also passing our long-term financial plan tonight. And if there's one thing that the long-term financial plan makes clear, it's that the good financial management of the city requires a dedicated and ongoing commitment from us as council. In short, councillors, we need to maintain discipline. We need to stick to the plan that's been developed over several years now for the benefit of the people that we serve. If we can do that, we'll be going a long way towards ensuring that our city, our neighbourhood, is one of the best places in Australia to live, work and play. And what higher purpose can we serve than that? Councillors, I commend this budget to you. That's me. Councillor D'Souza, anything to say as seconder?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just some brief comments. You've covered off on most of it, but I just want us to reflect on the fact this is the first budgeted operating surplus. When I was elected almost 7 years ago to date, this was a very distant hope, a distant aspiration. But the fact we've got there in 7 years, while keeping rates at or below CPI, is a testament to this council and to all city staff who've worked relentlessly to keep costs under control. And it's what the community expect of us. What's even more noteworthy is the fact that we've continued to deliver important community outcomes. And I won't go through them all because there are too many, but of personal note, of course, is the Manning bike track, which I've pushed for a long time and which is funded and which is going to commence design consultations soon. I think councillors should be very proud of what we've achieved because it is so rare. It is exceedingly rare for councils to deliver, and obviously this is the first, but hopefully the first of many, year in, year out operating surpluses while keeping rates at or below CPI. It takes a fiscally sound governance first mindset, and I think this council has met the mark. As the Mayor said, this isn't the end. This is the beginning, hopefully, of a continued sort of journey of fiscal responsibility. But likewise, I commend the budget and thank all that's involved for their hard work.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. I understand there's an amended motion. I think Councillor Coveney was first in time. Would you like to move that amended motion at this point, Councillor Coveney?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My amendment is to insert a new Part W to Recommendation 1, being that the schedule of fees and charges be amended to vary the fee charged by the City for granting of Section 69 certificates under the Liquor Control Act 1998 to $0.
Thank you. I'll just see if there's a seconder for that motion. Does anyone like to? Councillor Prendeville, thank you. Councillor Coveney, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If everyone turns to Part 2 of the Council agenda briefing on page 99, the fee set for this certificate is $204. So we aren't talking about anything substantial. I understand this is for new applications as opposed to those that are presently in the City. The reason for the change is this. The overwhelming majority of our residents want to activate our precincts. In particular, they want small wine bars and restaurants. The budget already provides for the waiver of our fresco and dining fees to send this signal to the market. So this amendment to waive the liquor certificate fees is just another signal to the market. There are only a handful of liquor certificates issued last year, I think about half a dozen, and it's anticipated then, therefore, that waiving these fees for the next financial year will only cost about $1,000. Of course, Council could potentially recover those fees if in the next couple of years we decided to charge our fresco and dining fees, because presumably the same businesses that are restaurants and small wine bars would also have those things. So that's the reason for the slight change.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillor Prendeville, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be brief. I agree with everything Councillor Coveney has said this evening. It's an insignificant financial impact, and I think we need. It's a good move forward for encouraging activation and the livening of our city. So I support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the amended motion? Councillor Choi, got a question, I believe.
Yes, I've got a few questions, just 3, I think, before
Fire away.
I can make my decision on this. So I understand from feedback received from City officers that although the Strategic Community Plan contains strategies for supporting community events broadly, there is no evidence to affirm the position put forth that the overwhelming majority of residents want to activate our precincts primarily with wine bars and restaurants. And if that is correct, is the City aware of where the fee exemption being sought for businesses has come from?
Mr Adams, should I send that in your direction? Could I get you to repeat the question, please? Oh, Ms Shaw? Yeah, Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So you're correct, the Strategic Community Plan does have a range of actions relating to activation. The City hasn't actually undertaken any sort of survey or the like of the broader community or the business community to affirm the position that an overwhelming majority of residents wanted that, but it is open to Council to look at waiving that fee or reducing it to nil as part of the budget process to send that signal.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Another question, Councillor Choi?
Yes, thank you through the Chair to Director Shaw. As it stands, the draft 24-25 annual budget does already provide for the waiver of our fresco dining and parklet fees for hospitality businesses. And acknowledging that all local businesses need support in one way or another, what are the other types of local businesses receiving in this draft budget by way of fee exemptions, please?
Ms Shaw or Mr Adams? It's probably more Mr Adams, isn't it? No, Ms Shaw. Okay, Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So there are no other proposed statutory fees for businesses that are proposed to be waived or removed. In general, the City provides business support through a range of other functions, such as promoting small businesses as part of the City's publications, buy local, shop local campaigns, supporting the Curtin Ignition program for local businesses, and just generally advocating to the state government for investment in that respect. In terms of statutory processes, it's more around making timely decisions on development and building and health applications to give some certainty to the businesses and how they operate.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi?
Yes, thanks again through the Chair to Director Shaw. The proposed amendment is to waive Liquor Control Act certificate fees, which fees charged on a full recovery basis, which means ratepayers will essentially be footing the bill for not only al-fresco dining and parklet related fees, but now also Liquor Control Act fees under this year's budget if endorsed. And does the city support this move?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So in general, we don't necessarily support waiving of fees for statutory processes because given there's a maximum fee prescribed in legislation for a range of the statutory applications, it's not necessarily cost recovery. In this instance, though, over the last few years, we've only issued 7 of these certificates and it totaled around $1,200 or something. So if it were to be waived, then there's a minimal impact in terms of the budget.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi, another question, or do you wish to speak?
Oh, no, I wish to speak now. Thank you, Mr Mayor. And again, through the Chair to Director Shaw. Look, acknowledging that it is only a minimal...
Perhaps you can let us know if you're speaking for or against the amended motion.
Yeah, for the amended motion. Thank you. Now that those questions have been answered. So just acknowledging, first of all, that it is only a minor recovery, statutory fee. I acknowledge the city's view on that. If it was a larger amount, then maybe I wouldn't be supporting it, but considering that it is only a small amount. And also acknowledging the support that I also support the local cities, local businesses, as demonstrated by my previous actions before this council, including my own motion to reduce red tape by waiving alfresco dining fees during and after COVID-19. Having established and run a business myself, I understand the challenges small business owners face, especially during unpredictable economic times. For these reasons, I will support the amended motion, as I've said. Moving forward, I would like to see all local businesses, not just those in hospitality, supported in reducing red tape. As such, I'm foreshadowing a motion for the July council meeting to amend policy P402, which will seek to provide all businesses...
Councillor Choi, we're very much getting off topic of the amended motion that's actually under debate. Could you please keep your comments relevant to the amended motion that's presently before us?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Which will seek to provide all business types the opportunity to benefit from free shop front and parklet space fees.
Councillor Choi, I just said please keep your comments relevant to the amended motion before us. You can deal with what you're proposing at the July meeting, but we're keeping it just to Councillor Coveney's amended motion for the time being, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm just talking about the fees, the fee waivering. So that's what it was regarding to. So that's all I'll say. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else wish to speak either for or against Councillor Coveney's amended motion? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thanks. I've got a couple of questions, Mr Mayor. So firstly, just point 2 says the budget already provides the waiver for the alfresco and dining fees. Is that in the 23-24 year as well as 24-25 year?
Should I send that to Ms Shaw?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the intent of that comment was to recognise that in the draft budget, which Council is considering tonight, it was proposed to reduce that to 0.
Okay, thank you, Director Shaw. And I have a second question. Do we have any other examples of any statutory fees that we provide waivers for?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, there are no other fees that we provide waivers for in that respect. However, it may be open for Council to consider that in future in light of matters related to trees or heritage.
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, does anyone else wish to speak either for or against Councillor Coveney's amended motion? Councillor Navard, a question or speaking?
Just speaking in support of it.
All right, fire away.
Yeah, well, I guess the point that I have on this is just that a commitment to having a liquor licence is beyond just the cost of the piece of paper. And therefore, I think it would become a self-governing process in terms of small businesses who would then wish to operate under a liquor licence. So from that perspective, that would be the reason that I'd be willing to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against Councillor Coveney's amended motion? No? Councillor Coveney, I don't think anyone actually spoke against it. If there was anything in the questions that you wanted to rebut, you've got the opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to address where I got the view that most residents wanted to activate our precincts. I door-knocked most of my ward. That was number one, if not number two, as the most important thing, and I think the election results, at least for myself, speak for themselves.
Thank you very much, Councillor Coveney. Councillors, I'm about to put Councillor Coveney's amended motion to the vote. Just to clarify, this is the amended motion that we're voting on, not the substantive. So with that, please cast your votes on Councillor Coveney's amended motion. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So we return now to the substantive amended officer recommendation. But councillor Choi, I do see that you also have an amended motion to the officer recommendation. Would you like to move that officer recommendation at this, would you like to move that amended motion at this stage?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right, if you could please read your amended, the actual motion itself, then I'll see about a seconder. And if there is a seconder, you'll be given the opportunity to give your reasons.
Thank you. That council adopts the annual budget 24-25 with the addition of part, and I'll change that W now to X since Councillor Coveney's motion went first and got passed, being an additional allocation of $500,000 is to be added to the Capital Works program for the replacement of the second Lake Douglas Bridge, being the north-eastern bridge, with the funding being allocated from any surplus funds generated from the 23-24 financial year, with any shortfall made up from the funds in the city's I've got the wrong one here, sorry. Where is it? Oh, sorry. Thank you, I was reading the wrong one. The city's Community Facilities Reserve.
Thank you, councillor Choi. Councillors, does anyone wish to second councillor Choi's amended motion? Councillor Navard. Councillor Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and Councillor Navard. The reasons for this are, one, on reviewing the city's consultant engineer's bridge inspection report, it is noted that only the superstructures, being the upper portion of the bridges where pedestrians walk, need replacement, with the substructures which support the entire structure on that surrounding soil only requiring repairs and strengthening. Therefore, it is the view that the project risk and risk of cost variations is low, and rather than the city expending funds on decommissioning an intact bridge that essentially only needs its decking replaced and not the underlying piles, that both bridges' superstructures be replaced and the substructures repaired. 2. The consultant engineers have also provided their own cost estimates to replace the bridge superstructures and repair the substructures on a separate job costing basis. Hence, there is duplication in equipment, services and consultancy fee charges, as the estimates have been provided as standalone projects, it appears. This can be viewed as an inefficient allocation of resources, with the requisite construction teams and equipment needing to be mobilised and demobilised multiple times for the same or similar work in the same area on the foreshore. If the bridges are replaced and repaired together by the same builder and crew under a phased approach, it is envisaged that the total cost should be less than the works expended on fixing one bridge at a time at separate distant intervals where costs could escalate. 3. The cost estimates provided today but received in October 2023 are also likely to increase if the works are delayed for yet another financial year. 4. There will also be duplication in tendering costs in treating the bridges as separate standalone projects in different financial years, leading to higher overall expenses. 5. The cost estimates are also inclusive of a generous 20% project contingency. The city historically have only allocated 5 to 8% for design and construction, including for the RAF project in March 2023. Hence, the actual cost to replace and repair the bridges could end up being much lower. 6. A foreseeable risk with the city contracting out the necessary works on the bridges at different periods is that different builders and or construction crew may end up working on the second bridge, and hence any learnings that may have been envisaged during replacement and repair of the first bridge will be lost. Whereas the same builder and crew can employ immediate learnings as they go if repairing both bridges one after the other or simultaneously. Furthermore, consistency in construction quality and standards between the two bridges could pose an issue. Performance of both bridge projects together would likely mitigate these risks. 7. Undertaking the bridge replacement and repair works at separate intervals will also only serve to extend the duration of disruption to both the community and the native wildlife that inhabit the lakes, with crane and excavator equipment required as set out in the cost estimates. Repeated environmental disturbances could prove harmful to the local ecosystem. 8, if the city's infrastructure project team has capacity to oversee one bridge replacement and repair in the upcoming financial year, it is feasible, given the similar nature of the work required for both bridges and their close proximity to one another on the South Perth foreshore, that both bridges could be replaced at the same time at a reduced overall cost. It would also perceivably reduce the administrative burden on needing to manage two separate projects and timelines. 9. There are available funds in the City's Community Facilities Reserve Fund, which in part exists to fund discretionary community facility projects. Given the bridge's location in prime recreation and tourist public open space, their conservation role and placement within the South Perth Foreshore Management Plan, the bridges are viewed as strategic community investment, as well as a well-utilised and much-loved community facility. Any anticipated capital surplus from the current 23-24 financial year, as reported in the May financial reports, with almost $155,000 being underspent in the foreshore natural areas budget alone, which had an original budget allocation of $900,000, could replenish the funds from that reserve. Albeit City officers have recommended the funding for the bridges pursuant to this motion can come directly from any anticipated surplus, if for whatever reason there is a shortfall, the funding source is also available in the relevant reserve and does not impact on rates, operating surplus or other projects or playground equipment expenditure, etc. 10. The South Perth foreshore has an annual maintenance budget to maintain the status quo of infrastructure assets. 2 out of 2 foreshore bridges being closed until the foreseeable future on the South Perth foreshore is not maintaining the status quo. The community have a right for reliance on their current infrastructure assets being maintained and renewed as required and in a timely manner, especially when those assets are only no longer operational and are closed out of safety concerns for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillor Navard, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Just very briefly, thank you, Mayor. We've committed to covering the cost of repair of one bridge, and there has been quite strong community concern and sentiment relating to the second bridge. Therefore, I'm willing to support agreeing to a further sum of money going towards the repair of the second bridge during the same annual budget.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. I guess I do have a question straight away, and I think I do have to direct it to Councillor Choi. Councillor Choi, the reasons that you've given and articulated seem to use the word replacement and repair interchangeably. Is your motion proposing the replacement of the bridges or the repair of the bridges?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not sure if you read the engineer's report, because it was pretty clear in there that part of the structures need replacement and part of them need repair. So I believe the part up the top, like the decking, needs replacement, and a little bit underneath near the piles need repair. That was my understanding of the report, of the engineer's reports.
Because your motion, I ask because your motion talks about replacement, but okay, all right. With that in mind, I might ask a question of Ms Amprimo as to what this means in terms of, firstly, the likely expenditure that we're going to experience, and secondly, whether or not we're genuinely going to get savings or economies of scale by attempting both projects at the same time, bearing in mind that similar projects such as the Redmond Stairs and the Black Swan habitat experience some pretty serious cost overruns by reason of unforeseen things coming to light during construction.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the question. I'm unsure myself whether this is intending that the city would repair the existing structure, because a lot of the information that it draws on from the report was based on replacing members of the structure, but essentially would be retaining the essence of the structure that is there. So the city looked into that, and in order to get, whilst there's a high-level cost estimate when the audit was done, in order to get a more accurate indication of what the cost would be, the city spoke to an engineer who specialises in this type of timber structure, and we were quoted in the region of $70,000 to come up with a design that would allow us to get a more accurate cost estimate. The best cost estimate we had at the time was essentially around $1 million. So we didn't pursue the option further of working with the existing structure, and we looked at alternative replacement bridges, which is what was presented to the elected members through the budget workshop process. That is where we came up with the figures for the replacement bridges, and that was the FRP option was the one that we have incorporated into the budget for the one bridge. And in terms of capacity to deliver, I would also say that we have an incredibly full programme in the budget as it is. Whilst it might only be one extra $500,000 project, it would still draw more on city resources. So there would be a risk that we would be unable to deliver it with the programme we have.
Thank you. And I suppose the second part of that question was the amended motion does rely on an argument that replacing both bridges as one project will be cheaper than replacing both bridges across two projects. Does the city have a view on that argument?
Yeah, apologies, Mr. Mayor, if I didn't answer your whole question the first time. There is, as a general rule, some cost saving by running the two projects together. However, these bridges are not the same. They're different spans. They would require different designs. There would be some potential cost savings in mobilisation, but they would be minimal compared to the overall cost of the project. And with this amendment, I'm unclear actually as to what council would be asking us to do, whether they're asking us to repair the existing bridges, whether they're asking us to do one in FRP as was proposed and the other one repairing the existing bridge that's there, which $500,000 would not meet our budget estimates. So I believe there would be significantly more management involved in doing the two. Doing them concurrently would have a small amount of cost saving, but doing one at a time would allow us to learn through that process and see if there's any innovative solutions we can come up with through that process that could save us considerably more when we look at the second one.
Thank you very much. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against the amended motion? Councillor Coveney.
Can I ask a question, please?
Of course.
My question's in relation to paragraph 5 of Councillor Choi's reasons, which refers to the contingency being higher than usual. I just wanted to know if that was correct, and if so, if it is correct, then why is it higher than normal?
Ms Emprema.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So project contingencies vary depending on the level of risk and the level of design that's completed at the time of the contingency being the cost estimate. So given we don't have a full design for a replacement bridge, 20% is a reasonable level of contingency. I note that in the reasoning it references the RAF workshop, the RAF contingencies. Elected members may recall that during that process the city did not support the contingency that was referenced in that estimate, and at the time the city's advice was to increase the contingency given the stage that we were at. So the city didn't previously endorse a contingency of 5 to 8% when there was only a very high level of design. In fact, the city advised council that that was insufficient when you have only an outline design.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the amended motion? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'd firstly like to acknowledge those residents that have spoken in support of the bridges, whether that be via email over in the last month or in the chamber last week. I don't doubt your love of the bridges and the importance of the bridges to you. Unfortunately, the City of Perth doesn't have an unlimited supply of money, and that means we have to make hard decisions. We need to put money into projects which benefit the most number of residents. Councillors were presented with different options and prices in relation to these bridges over the 4 budget workshops in the first half of this year. Those options including turning both bridges into bird sanctuaries, repairing both bridges, or repairing one and turning one into a bird sanctuary. Noting the cost to repair both bridges, but appreciating the importance of these bridges to some members of our community, The sentiment of councillors appeared to me to be that we repair one bridge and turn the other into a bird sanctuary. As we heard last week, there's about 150 people that use these bridges every day, whereas South Perth has about 45,000 residents. As we heard last week, the capital budget is almost double than what it ordinarily is. So even if we resolve to repair both bridges, they simply may not be able to be repaired by virtue of a lack of capacity, which means that we also risk other important community projects. As we heard last week, the pool of funds for the bridges comes from the same pool of funds as other capital works projects, such as indoor sports courts. If we were to take more money for the two bridges, we take money out of other much needed projects. And as we heard last week, if both bridges are repaired, we push rate rises above CPI. And in the context of being in a cost of living crisis, I'm not too keen on putting pressure on the tight budgets of our residents, young families, hardworking mums and dads and pensioners. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of the amended motion? No? Is there anyone else who would like to speak against the amended motion? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, speaking against or asking a question?
No, I'd like to speak for.
Okay, fire away.
Thank you. Thank you. I am supportive of this motion. This is asset renewal. So it's actually quite important that for the existing assets that we've got and that the community have been using, that they continue to actually be renewed. This asset is one of several bridges in that area, and including the bridge that cuts through the Paperbark Grove further west on Sir James Mitchell Park. It would be a significant loss to actually lose existing assets that the community have been appreciating and have been using and recreating with. I understand the city is actually going through quite a significant process right now to actually manage the assets and review that entire process. A lot of good time and money is being currently invested in managing assets. This is part of that process, and this is where we should actually be looking after and maintaining existing assets. Those structures have been there for many years, and the value attributed over many years is actually really quite small in comparison to the amenity that it creates. This motion does not result in an increase in rates. This motion has actually identified areas where there are existing savings. Year to date, May 2024, we have a favourable capital variance of about 1.1 million and a favourable operating variance of about 1.6 million. That's about 2.7 million. I understand the year is not over. There will be some adjustments, but either way, we are likely to still have a relatively good saving. If we look at the category of foreshore and natural areas, we started the year off with a budget which was at $900,000. We reduced that by about $330,000. So there was a $330,000 saving in the foreshore and natural areas that we didn't plan on spending this year. And year-to-date May, we also have approximately another $160,000 saving. So if we look at just that category of expenditure, there is roughly $500,000 that we wouldn't have otherwise ordinarily been spending this year. I am mindful there might be some late adjustments, but it is to look incredibly favourable. We are quite fortunate to have the opportunity to have possible surpluses and also plan for a surplus in this current year. And therefore, we should be considering assets that do need replacement. If we haven't invested the money on some of the assets in prior years, I think now there might be an opportunity to actually do that. One, with the revision of our asset management plan, and two, with favourable outcomes. So this impact, as I said, doesn't impact other projects at this point. It doesn't impact CPI rates, and it doesn't actually reduce any other activity from going ahead as part of the 24-25 budget year. For this reason, I support this amendment. I think it's appropriate for us to retain existing assets and continue with the renewal program. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Is there anyone who hasn't already spoken who would like to speak against the amended motion? Councillor Credland.
I think it'd be nice if we fixed up both of the bridges, but we've had our various councillor budget meetings to work out what the priorities were for us, and it wasn't amongst them. I'd be more minded, and we've got the advice that we can't, we're unlikely to be able to get through all of our capital works for this year, which is, as I understand it, the biggest renewal expenditure that we've had before. We have a razor-thin surplus, which is something we haven't had for a while, and that is as a result of the council deciding over the last 7 years to increase rates, which is our principal source of income, at a lower level than our costs have gone up. Now, if we are to take that razor-thin surplus and use it on capital works that as a group we didn't think was a priority, and that the city advice is that we can't get done in all likelihood this year anyway, then I don't think that is a good decision. I would have been more minded to support this if there'd been an associated amendment to increase the rates by the same amount that this additional cost will incur.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, is there anyone who hasn't already spoken who wishes to speak in favour of the amended motion? No? I might say a few words against the amended motion. I agree with what Councillor Coveney and what Councillor Cridland have already said. I'll do my best not to repeat the points they've already made, but at its heart, councillors, this amended motion proposes that we alter the budget by taking $500,000 effectively from this year's financial year's expected operating surplus, and then if there's any shortfall, taking it out of our financial reserves. We've been through 4 budget workshops with the city administration. We've considered a wide range of capital projects and carefully considered which of these wide-ranging projects are the greatest priorities for our community. We expressly considered this very project, and the consensus at the time was to allocate funding to replace one of the 2 bridges in the 2024-25 budget at a not insignificant cost of $350,000. Councillors, I've spoken before of our duty to prioritise projects to ensure that our residents and ratepayers get, across our entire district, get maximum value for money. This amended motion seeks an allocation of $500,000, but I do note Ms Amprimo's comments that in fact the project may end up costing much, much more than that. Let's be charitable, let's go with $500,000 for the time being. Is this the best possible use of that $500,000? Would our community think that this is the best possible use of that $500,000? From an infrastructure perspective, I'd argue that the $500,000 would be far better spent replacing and upgrading the ageing reticulation infrastructure servicing Sir James Mitchell Park, which is well due and I think failed a few times over the recent summer. From a community safety perspective, or an activation perspective, that $500,000 would be better spent on public lighting in our commercial precincts and our recreational spaces. And from a public health and wellness perspective, what if that $500,000 could be put towards a project that finally delivers indoor sports courts for our community? The point I'm making is that there are far more important uses for that $500,000, uses that would be of far greater benefit to the community we serve. This, like everything in the budget, is a question of priorities. On top of that, Ms Amprimo and other councillors have referred to the capacity of the city to carry out these additional works during the 2024-25 financial year. This was discussed at the budget workshops and it was reiterated last week. We have a very significant capital works program for the 2024-25 financial year, and I actually suspect we're going to struggle to complete all of the works in the current program without adding another very significant project. Here are my concerns about the arguments that Councillor Choi has advanced. First of all, the amended motion presupposes that we will definitely replace the second bridge. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. That's a decision for future budgets to be weighed against the other competing community priorities at the time. What is certain at this point in time is that there are other capital projects that have higher priority and which represent significantly better amenity value for our community. Those projects, at least in my opinion, should be funded and completed first. Secondly, and this has largely been covered by Ms Amprino already, but the amended motion relies heavily on an assumption that replacing both bridges in one project is going to be significantly cheaper than replacing the bridges across two projects. Well, if we were talking about routine, easy projects that the city does a lot of, I might be inclined to agree, but this is not a routine, easy project that the city's got a lot of experience in executing. What history has taught us is that projects of these nature often throw up unexpected and unanticipated challenges that result in very significant cost blowouts. We saw this with the Redmond Stairs project, we saw this with the Black Swan Habitat project. It's no secret, we're in volatile economic times. There's inflation, there's workforce shortages, there's supply chain issues creating a lot of uncertainty. That doesn't mean we don't do these projects, but it does mean that caution is appropriate for projects of this nature and that the usual rules concerning economies of scale don't necessarily apply here. I've almost used 5 minutes. Would someone be kind enough to move a motion that Councillor Cridland and seconded by Councillor Waugh? Thank you. Councillors, could you please cast your votes as to whether I should get a further 5 minutes? I promise I won't use all of it. And that was unanimous. Thank you all for the indulgence. I do appreciate it. Based on what the city administration has told us, I really don't think that going ahead with replacing both bridges at once is the prudent option here. I just don't. To be clear, and Councillor Coveney alluded to this, I understand, I've seen the emails that have come in from our community. I don't think anyone would oppose the replacement of the second Lake Douglas Bridge if we had infinite funds and infinite capacity, but we don't. For every dollar of public funds that we spend, we have a responsibility to consider what is the best use of that dollar for the people that we're elected to serve. We don't always have to say no, but sometimes, if we are going to be responsible custodians of the public purse, we do have to say not yet. And this is one of those times. Councillors, I spoke earlier of the need for us to maintain financial discipline if we're going to safeguard the long-term financial sustainability of the city and the corresponding district-wide amenity for our community. Absolutely. There's a lot of people that are very fond of the Lake Douglas bridges and would love to see them replaced. Totally get that. But we do have to consider the needs of the district as a whole. This isn't the best use of that $500,000. I'm not prepared to make a very significant amendment to the budget in these circumstances. I just don't think that would be responsible. I just don't think that would be in line with good financial management. So, councillors, I'll be voting against this amended motion. That's me. Is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against the amended motion who hasn't already spoken? No. Councillor Choi, if you'd like to wind up and rebut any arguments made during the debate, you have 5 minutes to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor, and to my fellow councillors. Firstly, funding for this project and others are not mutually exclusive, so conflating that as such I don't believe is very helpful. This motion is not taking out any money from any other project budget or putting rates up. So again, I find some of those points interesting and also unhelpful in relation to what I'm trying to get across with this motion. This motion is about asset renewal. We weren't able to receive the maintenance costs for the bridges at the agenda briefing last week, which I did ask for, as I believe that hasn't been maintained or is not available for this meeting. However, we do know the budget for the foreshore in the current financial year has been underspent. So, regardless of the materials used to replace the bridges, which is what the motion is actually seeking. It's used the word replacement. I know I've used repairs as well in the reasons, but the motion is actually seeking replacement of the second bridge as well as the first, so basically exactly the same thing. The cost is likely to be more if the bridge is delayed, the second bridge is delayed into another financial year. And as I've said, there could also be inconsistencies between the bridge replacements, structures being different, materials, design, etc., etc. So I'm not going to go any further than that. I can kind of read the tea leaves, but I just would like to end it there then. Thank you. And I just ask for you to please consider this and support it.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillors, I'm about to put Councillor Choi's amended motion to the vote. Just a reminder, this isn't the substantive vote on the budget itself. This is the vote on Councillor Choi's amended motion. So with that, please cast your votes. All right, so the votes come in. The amended motion has been lost, 3 votes to 6. And when my screen comes up with who voted which way, I'll let people know for the benefit of those listening via YouTube. Okay, so those in favour were Councillor Choi, Councillor Brenda Brandis, Councillor Navard. Those against were Councillor Coveney, Councillor Credland, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Prendeville, Councillor Waugh and myself, Mayor Milner. All right. So we now return to the officer recommendation as amended by Councillor Coveney's amended motion. I haven't received any other amended motions. Is there, and bearing in mind that if you've spoken on the amended motions, you're still okay to speak on the substantive motion. That's not speaking twice. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the amended officer recommendation? Councillor Choi has some questions. Fire away, Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So noting that it's proposed under 24, and sorry, my questions are in relation to the fees and charges schedule, which I believe I've provided some of these questions on notice to the city officers. Noting it's proposed under 24-25 fees and charges schedule of the draft annual budget, the local business owners will no longer be required to pay for alfresco dining or any parklet licence fees on public land. And noting that councillors have previously been advised when discussing matters such as paid parking that each on-street parking bay costs around $35,000 to construct. Is there an estimated loss that can be provided for potentially any future paid parking revenue that could have been charged for car bays in those precinct areas where parklets are now likely to be established instead for free? Thank you.
Mr Adams, can I send that your way?
So, no, I think the cost of a car bay being at $35,000 is the cost of construction. We're not anticipating any lost revenue from the use of car bays.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillor Choi, another question?
Yes, thanks through the Chair to Director Adams. A business owner has asked me whether shop front and parklet licences, noting that the one that has been approved so far in the city has been granted exclusive use of that space, so whether other business owners, maybe with different types of businesses, can also be granted, for example, a gift shop, fruit and veg shop, or even a flower shop, if they're able to display their wares outdoors in front of their shop and car bay space to attract more business to their shops. And if not, why would those businesses be treated any differently, please?
Sorry, Councillor Choi, I'm just going to ask for a little bit of clarification there. What relevance does that have to the budget?
I'm talking about fees exemptions.
All right. Ms Shaw, should I send that in your direction?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So if a business owner was using a space to display and sell retail goods, it would be considered a retail shop land use, and it would be considered trading in a public place. It requires a separate licence and application fee. It wouldn't be treated the same way it would be treated as a parklet.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Another question, Councillor Choi?
No, I think that's all. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right. Councillor Coveney, a question, or would you like to speak?
Question and then speak in favour, please, Mr Mayor.
Of course.
Is the administration aware of anywhere else in WA that uses parklets for private businesses other than for hospitality?
I'm going to allow it, but it does seem like we're morphing into a debate on whether or not we should have parklets in the city of South Perth as opposed to the actual budget, which is the item under discussion, I'm going to allow the question, but I am going to caution all councillors to keep questions and statements relevant to the actual issue being debated. Ms Shaw, can I send that one your way?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not aware of any other parklets that are used for anything other than hospitality.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I guess just to clarify, I think both myself and Councillor Coveney's question was sort of covering in terms of the fee schedule, is there any other fees in there that pertains to other types of businesses other than hospitality? So maybe I should have worded it in that manner.
Thank you for the clarification. Mr Bradford?
Well, I mean, there's lots of fees in the fee schedule that do pertain to businesses, but in relation to what?
So, sorry, in relation to like shop front or parklets.
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If they were trading in a public place outside of a parklet and they were using a thoroughfare, they would need a separate licence and there would be an application fee associated with that under our local laws. But anything else would relate to private property and then there'd be associated development application fees and health fees and the like.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Coveney, you indicated that you wish to speak. Perhaps you can let us know if you're speaking for or against the officer recommendation as amended by your amended motion.
Speaking for, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm so pleased to support this year's budget and I commend the administration who have clearly worked incredibly hard to provide something for everyone whilst remaining financially disciplined. In my election campaign last year, I stood for many things such as activation, supporting local clubs, community safety, especially around better lighting and stopping hoons, enclosed dog parks and strong financial management, and this budget delivers just that. In relation to the activation of the precincts, first, as we've all heard, the city's waiving our fresco and parklet fees and now liquor certificate fees as a clear signal to the market that residents want small wine bars and restaurants. Residents want Angelo Street, Menn Street and Preston Street to rival the likes of Subiaco and Mount Hawthorn. Residents want South Perth to become a premier dining destination. Second, the city has increased its budget for the community development funding stream. Residents want their annual festivals back, Angelo Street, Preston Street, akin to the Manning Laneway Festival. This is an avenue for funding support for community groups such as Towns to Teams. We want to breathe life into our precincts. We want to encourage and foster community spirit. Third, the city is investing in new festive lighting in our precincts. Again, this is about activation and community. In relation to the foreshore, first, for another year, the city will continue its annual concert, its carols at Sunset and Fringe World, and will continue its partnership with Streets. Second, the Coode Street end of the foreshore will finally get a new public toilet block, something I know that residents have long been waiting for. And third, one of the Lake Douglas bridges will be repaired and the other converted into a bird sanctuary for our wildlife. In relation to supporting local clubs, first, the city will renew and add to the change rooms at Bill Graydon Reserve, Challenger Reserve, Collier Reserve, George Burnett Park, Morris Mundy Reserve and Richardson Park Reserve. This improves our existing sporting facilities and encourages participation, especially amongst women at all levels. Second, the city will install new sports lighting around George Burnett Park, Challenger Reserve and Richardson Park. This means sporting clubs can use their ovals for longer and enhances community safety. And third, the city will commence its master plan implementation of the Manning bike track nearby to the existing Manning skate park. This is a place which will add to the amenity of our residents and promote healthy lifestyles for our children. In relation to community safety, first, the city is investing in closing the Millers Pool car park after dark and adding better lighting there to combat the hoons. And second, in addition to better lighting in our precincts and at our sporting ovals, the city is investing in improving some of the lighting on the foreshore. This is about using our spaces for longer and feeling safer in our neighbourhoods. In relation to enclosed dog parks, this year the city has gone from having no enclosed dog parks to 2. Olives Reserve will be converted into a fully enclosed dog park for large dogs and Coma Reserve will be converted into a fully enclosed dog park for small dogs. This will ensure our pooches are safe to play without owners being fearful of them running onto the road or little dogs being attacked by much larger dogs. And lastly, in relation to financial management, this budget proposes a rate rise at CPI. There are so many councils across WA who have increased rates above CPI, and in a cost of living crisis, this is something that we can all be very proud of.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. I'm just going to take a moment to apologise to the gallery. I understand that the TV monitors may not be working at the moment, so apologies for that. We are using a new system at the moment, and we obviously haven't ironed out all the glitches yet. With that, is there anyone who would like to speak to the amended officer recommendation as amended by Councillor Coveney's amended motion, who either for or against, who hasn't already spoken? No. Okay. I don't think there's much to say for me by way of winding up, because on the actual substantive motion, no one seems to be opposed. So I'll simply put this item to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. This is the substantive motion, the officer recommendation as amended by Councillor Coveney's amended motion. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Okay, so we move on to item 10.4.3, which is the City of South Perth Fencing Local Law 2024. We have an officer recommendation before us. We also have an amended motion that has been put forward by Councillor Glenn Cridland. I'll start by asking if anyone wants to move the officer recommendation. I will. Is anyone willing to second? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Councillors, I don't have much to say about this. It's something we probably have to do. It's something that we're conscious that we'll have to pass through the state government's committee for delegated legislation. So it's not necessarily a fait accompli if we pass it here tonight. That's all I have to say. Councillor Coveney, anything to say, seconder?
Nothing to say, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Cridland, I understand you do have an amended motion. Would you like to move that amended motion at this time?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I would move my amendment, subject to there being a seconder.
All right, perhaps I'll get you to read the... Oh, okay, yes, I appreciate it. That is a long one. In the absence of their TV monitors, though, I think I'd better ask you to read it, though.
All right, well, I apologise to everyone who's listening who's not interested in fencing. My amendment is that subparagraph 4 be added to the officer's recommendation as follows. For the purposes of this motion, Division 4 of the proposed local law be replaced with the following text. And that is, Division 4 is home recreational sports fencing. And the words that would go in, which are quite similar to the words that were in there before, is as follows. 2.13 subsection 1, a person shall not erect a fence higher than 1800 millimetres in height around or partially around a home tennis court, comma, basketball court, comma, netball court, comma, cricket practice area or similar home sporting area on a lot within 900 millimetres of a lot boundary with a residential use lot, unless A, the person has given at least 60 days prior notice to the owner of any residential use lot immediately adjoining that part of the fence that is higher than 1800 millimetres of the person's intention to erect such fence and the design thereof and proposed fencing materials to be used. And B, fence is not more than 3,000 millimetres in height, and C, the fence above 1800 millimetres in height is either constructed of Roman 1 chain link mesh and is polyvinyl coated or galvanised and installed in accordance with manufacturer's specifications, or Roman 2 flexible retractable nylon or similar mesh, or subsection D, the fence is otherwise approved by the local government. And subsection 2, in determining any application for approval under subsection 1D, the local government shall invite submissions on the proposal from the owner of any residential use lot immediately adjoining that part of the fence that is proposed to be higher than 1800 millimetres, and shall consider any such submission in making its decision under clause 3.2.
Thank you.
That's what I would propose goes in.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. I'll see about a seconder now, and if there is a seconder, I'll give you the floor for your reasons. Is there anyone who would like to second Councillor Cridland's amended motion? Councillor Waugh, thank you. Councillor Cridland, the floor is yours.
The amendment is not, in my view, a substantial change from the words there, and it will deal with only the relatively infrequent cases of new home recreational sporting facilities that are to be approved and require fencing to maintain the amenity of neighbours. From my recollection, there's been, I think, 3 home tennis courts and 1 basketball court in the city in the last 15 years that are new. I know of some tennis courts in Melville and cricket nets, and this really just deals with those. It provides some certainty about giving a height restriction of 3 metres, and we're talking here about without special approval from the local government, which is the City of South Perth. And it also provides that the area above 1.8 metres, which is the normal height of a fence, has to be visually permeable so that sun and I guess the sky is not obstructed for the neighbours, but it will still keep out those annoying balls if they go flying over the fence. And it also means that the person who wants to put up this fence with their new sports court or cricket nets has to give the neighbour a couple of months' notice so they know what's coming and how it's going to be built. That is the purposes for my amendment. It is, in most respects, pretty similar to the words that are there, but it combines basketball and tennis courts into the one, and also includes netball courts, because I'm aware of 1 in South Perth, and also cricket practice areas. I don't think it's perhaps been the greatest issue that you other councillors ran across, perhaps not as much as wine bars, Councillor Coveney, but I do hope that the council will consider my suggestions.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillor Waugh, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
I have nothing to add. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Right. I might ask a question of Ms Shaw. I have no problem with the intent of what Councillor Cridland is proposing, but I am aware that after we pass this, the local law has got to go through the Western Australian Parliamentary Joint Standing Committee on Delegated Legislation, and that if they think that a local law contradicts state or federal legislation, that they will disallow that local law. Do you foresee any problems with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, there are very few local laws that actually deal with tennis court fencing. I haven't seen one drafted before that provides for home recreational sports fencing, but the drafting of the provision is very consistent to what you would otherwise expect in a local law for tennis court fencing in relation to the height and the materials. So I can't imagine that there would be any issues from Joint Standing Committee on Delegated Legislation. But if there were, then it's just a separate administrative and council process to progress the undertaking to modify the local law.
Thank you very much. On that basis, I'll support the amended motion. I think Councillor Choi was first. Question or speaking for or against?
Just a question, first of all. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't have an issue with this amended motion on the face of it, but just wondering where the provisions came from, the wording in the provisions provided came from. Are these standard clauses? Maybe it's a question for Councillor Cridland, because obviously we've only just received this, I think, this evening, so I haven't had a chance to ask Councillor Cridland this prior to the meeting. Thank you.
I'll send that to Ms Shaw, but if Councillor Cridland wishes to, he can make comment on that and is winding up. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I mean, I can assume that 1.8 metres in terms of the height of a fence is typically a standard fence height. The 3 metre maximum height is consistent with other existing local laws in terms of the height of tennis court fencing.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Coveney, I saw your hand go up there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just one question, and I'm sorry if Councillor Cridland has already answered and I'm just deaf. What is the key differences between this amendment and what's in there presently?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the existing draft just provides specifically for tennis court fencing and for basketball court fencing, whereas this provision provides for a broader range of fencing in relation to cricket practice areas and netball courts as well. And it also changes the height down to 1.8 metres with a maximum of 3 metres instead of providing an as of right 3 metres. And there is also a provision that requires consultation for at least 60 days with the neighbouring property owner.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, Councillor De Souza speaking for or against, or a question?
Just a question, Mr Mayor. How will this, I guess, amendment affect planning approvals or other planning issues for areas such as Precinct 13 being the Salter Point escarpment, given the angled nature of that area?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Given its open style fencing, it wouldn't be treated as an external wall or a wall for the purposes of the residential design codes. So we wouldn't be treating it as if it required a development application. It would be treated as if it's a fence under the local law that may require a building permit depending on the nature of the structure.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak either for or against the amended motion? Councillor Choi.
Sorry, can I just ask a question? Just following on from Councillor De Souza's
Of course.
question and direct to Shaw's response. So does that mean there would be no boundary wall, that whatever this fence, as outlined in this motion, would actually be on the person's property, the applicant's property?
Ms Shaw?
It's talking about fences, it's a fencing local law. I'm just trying to understand that.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So it would be treated as a fence. It wouldn't be treated as a boundary wall for the purpose of the residential design codes. Typically, fences, you can provide for them to be provided for up to 900 millimetres setback for fire separation purposes if it's connected to an existing wall. So even though it would potentially be set back 900 in, it would still be treated as a fence as opposed to a wall.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against Councillor Cridland's amended motion? No. Councillor Cridland, if there's anything that you want to say in winding up, I don't think anyone spoke against expressly, but there were some questions you may wish to clarify.
I'll push the button so people can hear me. I don't think it's the greatest issue on annual budget night, so I won't bore people any longer.
Alrighty, so I'm about to put Councillor Cridland's amended motion to the vote. It's not the substantive motion, it's Councillor Cridland's amended motion. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. So we come back to the officer recommendation as amended by Councillor Cridland's amended motion. That is now the substantive motion before us. Does anyone wish to speak either for or against? Nope. Okay. I think I moved it originally. I don't have anything to say by way of winding up. I'll simply put the officer recommendation as amended by Councillor Cridland's amended motion to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous again. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to item 10.4.4, entitled Corporate Business Plan 2024/25 to 2027/28. I have received an amended motion from Councillor Choi, but I guess to get the ball rolling, I'll see if anyone wants to move the officer recommendation. Do we have a mover, please? All right, I'm busy tonight. I'll move that one. Is there anyone willing to second? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Okay, not much to say, councillors. We are required to have a corporate business plan underneath the regulations that apply to local governments. It's pretty much the strategic planning to the, I suppose, the community strategic plan's strategic thinking. It sets out how we're going to achieve the broad objectives, the broad goals, the broad outcomes that we want to achieve for our community over the next 4 years. We have to have one. I think the officers have done a very, very good job with the one in front of us. I think that if we can carry out what's in this corporate business plan, the City of South Perth will be better than what it is right now, which would be absolutely fantastic. Nothing further to say on that. Councillor Coveney, anything to say, seconder?
Nothing further, thank you.
All right. I am aware that Councillor Choi has got an amended motion that she's submitted. Councillor Choi, would you like to move your amended motion at this point in time?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. That Council adopts the Corporate Business Plan 24-25 to 27-28 as contained within Attachment A with the following amendment. Page 25 of the plan be amended to remove the project titled South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan 2015 from section 2.1 of the plan, and page 31 of the plan be amended to add the project titled South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan 2015 to section 3.3 of the plan.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Does anyone wish to second Councillor Choi's amended motion? Councillor Navard, thank you. Councillor Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and to Councillor Navard. My reasons for this change are as follows. 1. The South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan is listed as a strategic environmental management plan on the city's website, along with all other foreshore management plans, including the Clontarf Waterford Salter Point Foreshore Master Plan and Kwinana Freeway Foreshore Management Plan. Hence, it belongs in the Environment, Built and Natural Strategic Direction classification of the Corporate Business Plan. 2. The primary focus of the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan, as detailed in the plan, is ecology, biodiversity, conservation, culture and heritage, with economy and other priorities being a secondary consideration and only where such economic development is identified as being appropriate to the surrounding environment. For instance, the plan's overarching project, listed on page 25 of the draft Corporate Business Plan, is environmental in nature, being the development and management of regional reserve to enhance a functional, healthy river and foreshore environment. Similarly, the South Perth Foreshore River Wall project, outlined on page 38 of the draft Corporate Business Plan, addresses primarily environmental issue and climate-related need, with any economic aspect being secondary. The responsible business unit listed in the Corporate Business Plan for services and projects pursuant to the South Perth Foreshore Strategy Management Plan is the Parks and Environment team. Hence, it is again appropriate to classify the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan under the corresponding strategic direction Environment, Built and Natural. The plan also primarily aligns with the Environment, Built and Natural priorities, outcomes and strategies 3.1 to 3.4.1 of the Strategic Community Plan. At page 21, which includes to maintain and improve biodiversity, improve the amenity, value and sustainable uses of public open spaces and foreshores, and the enhancement of the environment, maintaining open space and effective management of the Swan and Canning River foreshores. Hence, it is inconsistent for this plan to remain under a different strategic direction classification in the Corporate Business Plan. 4. The city's main projects on the South Perth foreshore in recent years have been centred around environmental and wildlife conservation, including but not limited to foreshore restoration works, the Millers Pool Project, the Black Swan Habitat, the Swan Canning River Park Urban Forest Program, Hurlingham Living Stream Project, the Sir James Mitchell Park Lake Sedge Planting Project, Saving Our Snake Neck Turtle Project and the Lake Douglas Bridges. The city, with its environmental team, has also partnered with various environmental and conservation agencies, community and reference groups in respect to the South Perth foreshore, including but not limited to the former Aboriginal Reference Group, the DBCA, River Guardians, Friends of the South Perth Wetlands, and most recently Murdoch University. 5. The City Administration have advised that they are not aware of any significant implications of including the South Perth Foreshore Strategy Management Plan under the environmental rather than the economic strategic direction in the Corporate Business Plan. 6. By reason of the foregoing, for consistency, accountability, good governance and transparency purposes, the South Perth Foreshore Strategy Management Plan should be classified under the Environment, Built and Natural Strategic Direction in the Corporate Business Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillor Navard, you've seconded the amended motion. Would you like to speak?
Yes, very briefly. I guess the point that where I see this as a justified consideration is that the original strategy was devised in 2015. It's now 2024. And I do believe that there's been a change in community sentiment. And so for that reason alone, I think it's worthy to consider this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the amended motion? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't support moving the South Perth Foreshore Strategy Management Plan from the economic section of the corporate business plan to the environmental section. Whilst I accept that some of the plan is environmental, when you read that document, much of it's actually economic, especially the priority areas, which I suspect is why it's in the economic section in the first place. The corporate business plan is only a 4-year plan to define how the city is going to achieve its aspirations, and the strategic community plan by identifying priorities, services, projects and actions to be implemented. Pages 10 to 12 of the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan provides a good summary of what the priorities and strategies for the foreshore actually are. There are 4 whole of foreshore strategies. The first 3 are transport, infrastructure and activation. My view is those are economic, not environmental in nature. The foreshore is then broken down further into 10 nodes in order of priority, with specific strategies for each node. The first 4 priority nodes in this order are Menn Street, Coode Street, Menn Street Beach and Coode Street Beach. The specific strategy for Priority 1 Menn Street is to develop an active piazza and promenade with day and night activities. In my view, that's economic. The specific strategy for Priority 2 Coode Street is to develop a better serviced family rec space with improved facilities, choice of food and beverage outlets, and a diversity of activities including playground, rowing, sailing, boat mooring and water play. Again, I say most of those could be economic. The specific strategy for Priority 3 Menn Street Beach is to develop a rec amenity with addition of shade and shelter and rowing and kayaking. Again, I say at least the latter 2 are economic. The specific strategy for Priority 4 Coode Street Beach is to improve the amenity with the addition of shade and shelter and for catamarans, rowing, kayaking and other beach activities. Again, I say a lot of that's economic. So in summary, when I read the priorities of the South Perth Foreshore Plan and note that the corporate business plan is a 4-year plan, I say it's appropriate that that plan remains in the economic section.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Councillor Prendeville, speaking for or against the amended motion or asking a question?
I just have a question, if I may.
Please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I note point 5 in Councillor Choi's motion, but I'm just interested if there are any further comments from the city's administration, if there's a view on any specific impacts of this motion that we should be aware of.
Mr Adams, should I send that your way?
I think I answered this at last week's agenda briefing, but clearly there's arguments for and against putting it in either of those particular categories, and we went through the same sorts of discussions around where it should sit, and determined that we felt the best fit was where we ended up putting it within the economy area. But there's arguments for it being within the environment area as well. I don't think there's a great deal of difference in terms of how we're going to approach the particular project and carry out any of the actions within that project because of where it sits within a corporate document. And at the end of the day, how we carry out and approach those actions and directions is going to be determined by council anyway. So,
thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of the amended motion? Is there anyone who wishes to speak against? I might ask a question. It's along the same lines of Councillor Prendeville's question, and apologies if it's really been answered already, but I guess at the end of the day, is there any practical benefit that would be achieved if council were to pass this amended motion? Mr Adams, I might send that your way.
Not from an administrative point of view. So there may be there's always a different perspective that can be overlaid on these sort of things. But from an administrative perspective, it doesn't make any difference from our point of view. As I said, we would approach it in the same way.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the amended motion? Councillor D'Souza.
I'll briefly speak against it, and I understand what Councillor Choi is intending to do. My main reason against it is with regards to reason 1, which mentions the Clontarf Waterford Salter Point Foreshore Master Plan. I see that as a bit different to the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan, because the Clontarf Waterford Salter Point Foreshore is much more environmental and sort of suburban amenity in character, whereas as Councillor Coveney has mentioned, the South Perth Foreshore has areas of environmental significance, but also has areas of economic and activation significance. So I do think the current categorisation is right, but also noting what Director Adams said, it'll come back to council anyway for major decisions on this area. So for those reasons, I'll be voting against this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Anyone else to speak either for or against? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, and if you can let us know if you're speaking for or against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking for this item. I'll speak very briefly. I think in summary, this should be considered in terms of environment. I think it's really quite important that we should actually specify that the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan is more of a focus on environment as opposed to economy. Perhaps if it had more trees along the foreshore, it might have a greater focus. But I think first and foremost, environment is our concern. It should be categorised the same. Economy is important. Our economy is restricted in many ways because we don't have a significant commercial operation. So I think it is what it is. It's on the foreshore. It's filled with parks, trees, riverbanks, walls. It should be attributed to that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, anyone else to speak either for or against the amended motion who hasn't already spoken? All right, I might say a few words. I'll be speaking against the amended motion. Councillors, this amendment seeks to remove one section of text from the economy section of the corporate business plan and then transplant it into the environment section. Doesn't seem to be any practical benefit in doing that, at least from the administration's point of view. We've heard from Mr Adams on that. As some of you might know, I'm not a big fan of motions that don't actually achieve anything of substance. This does seem to be a case of change for change's sake. I take the view that we should only effect change when that change is going to make a positive difference to the people we serve. I've read the reasons given for this amended motion. I don't agree with Councillor Choi's argument that the primary focus of the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan is environmental in nature. I've listened to the comments from Councillor Coveney. I agree. I actually went back and refreshed my memory as to what the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan actually says for this item. One only needs to look at the Minderup development and the transformation of the Men's Street commercial precinct to understand the importance of the South Perth foreshore to the South Perth economy. Council is also aware of the plans to activate the area around Miller's Pool with a cafe. We've been working with the state government for several years now to achieve this. In fact, out of the 10 nodes that are set out in the plan, I would say that at least 4 of those nodes have a primarily economic rather than environmental focus. And if one classifies sporting, exercise and recreational activity as falling more into the economy category rather than the environment category, then all 10 nodes have an economic focus. Yes, the plan absolutely has an environmental focus as well, no arguments there. City officers have expressly advised us last week that the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan entry in our corporate business plan could sit under either heading. So I guess the question is, why do I care? Some may argue that if the amended motion has no practical effect, what's the harm in passing it? Well, I guess my answer to that is I'm sure this amended motion is being proposed in good faith, but apparently harmless changes, especially to such an important document as our corporate business plan, can sometimes have unintended consequences. For example, I would not like to see the change being proposed here being invoked either by this council or a future council as a reason to oppose activation on the South Perth foreshore. I wouldn't like to see this proposed change being invoked as a reason to, say, not open up parts of the South Perth foreshore for sporting and recreational uses, particularly following the completion of the Elam Street feasibility study that Council approved in December of last year. I wouldn't want to see this proposed change being invoked as a reason not to facilitate the cafe proposed for Miller's Pool, a project that Council and the City have been working together for years now. In short, I wouldn't like to see this change being invoked as a reason to oppose activation and the use of this very, very important community space that arguably represents the city's single greatest and most significant natural, economic and recreational asset. So, to my mind at least, there's no benefit to this amended motion, but there is a potential downside. And for these reasons, I ask Council to reject this amended motion. That's me. Is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Choi has a question. Fire away.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. For projects that appear under the Environmental Strategic Direction currently and foreseeably in the draft corporate business plan, where are those costings allocated under the Environmental or Economy Strategic Direction, please?
Mr Adams, should I send that your way?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Yeah, I wasn't too sure either. Councillor Choi, could I get you to restate the question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So if you have a project like the Riverwall sitting under economy and there is funds allocated to that project, is it not allocated then into planning versus parks and maintenance, even though it's to do with the foreshore? That's the kind of question I'm asking.
Mr Adams?
Sorry, no, river walls would sit within the infrastructure budget and would be in, I think Mr Lecoq will be able to answer exactly.
Mr Lecoq?
Through the Mayor, typically most of these projects that you're referring to in terms of the actual execution of the infrastructure would go into the capital budget. And as you would have noticed, the capital budget is not stratified in the way that you are referring to. It actually addresses foreshore, parks, plant and equipment, etc.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Councillors, anyone to speak either for or against the amended motion who hasn't already spoken? No? Councillor Choi, if you'd like to rebut any arguments made during the debate on the amended motion, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It won't take that long. Look, the aspirations for each strategic direction are different. So if you look at the corporate business plan, there's an aspiration under each of the 4 directions. So they're different. So why are they there? They do make a difference because that is what the city are looking at when they allocate, I guess, the projects under each one. So we currently have projects for the plan sitting under both economy, but mainly under environment. And that's not just currently, but also in the draft. So this is where, when I looked at it, I thought, hang on a second, why is it straddling kind of both? And then that's why I was asking the question, like, well, where's the budget allocated for these projects? Is it in one area or the other or both? So to me, it does make a difference. It does, the aspiration is there for a reason. And we need to protect our public open spaces. We need to be thinking about our local fauna and flora. And I agree with Councillor Navard, times have changed and people, especially since COVID, have rethought the importance of their environment a lot more than maybe pre-COVID or, a few years ago. So especially with climate change and everything being more evident. So to me, the aspiration does mean something. And when you look at the plan, from my perspective, the overarching primary concern is environmental, with economy having to fit into that space, not the other way around. So that's why, to me, it doesn't make sense to have it only in economy. So I guess if I could have read the tea leaves a bit earlier, I may have proposed that it go into both. And I believe that Director Adams did actually say it could go into both economy and environmental, and straddle both. But then I decided, well, no, I principally believe it should be environmental. So that's where I will head with my motion. So I've done that, and I'll leave it with the council decide which way they want to go with it. But I do encourage council to please reconsider this, and to consider this and to vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. So, councillors, I'm about to put Councillor Choi's amended motion to the vote. It's not the substantive motion, it's Councillor Choi's amended motion. Councillors, please cast your votes. All right. So, Councillor Choi's amended motion has been lost, 4 votes to 5. And when the screen tells me who voted which way, I'll read that out. Here we go. Those in favour were Councillor Choi, Councillor Brenda Brandis, Councillor Navard and Councillor War. The screen has disappeared, but those who voted against by deduction are Councillor Coveney, myself, Mayor Milner, Councillor Cridland, Councillor D'Souza, that's 5, isn't it? And Councillor Prendeville. Yes, thank you, Councillor Prendeville. All right, very good. And we will get these, we will get the new system sort of a little bit more streamlined going forwards. We now move on to item 10.4.6, which is the monthly financial statements of May 2024. We have an officer recommendation before us. I haven't received any amended motions or alternative motions. I understand it was Councillor Brenda Brandis, I think, that asked for this one to be withdrawn. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? Councillor Prendeville, thank you. Someone to second? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Councillor Prendeville, anything to say?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
All right, thank you. Councillor Coveney? No? Councillor Brenda Brandis, I assume that you want to ask a question or something? All right, please ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions, and it sort of ties in with the budget as well. So, page 146, the capital year-to-date budget. So I've just got a couple of questions around that. So the capital year-to-date budget is showing $10.4 million. The full-year budget's showing $15.3 million. So just a question with regard to the...
Councillor Brenda Brandis, I do apologise. Governance has just pointed out that I've been very naughty. We voted on the amended motion to the corporate business plan, but I neglected to bring the substantive back to the floor to pass. So, naughty Mayor Milner. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak? Either we're jumping back to 10.4.4. Is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the officer recommendation, the unamended officer recommendation? Nope. Okay. I think I was the mover, wasn't I? Yes, I was. Nothing to say by way of winding up. Councillors, I'll simply put the officer recommendation on item 10.4.4 to the vote. And apologies for having gotten us off track there. And thank you, Mr. Hindle, for the reminder. All right, so the corporate business plan has passed 8 votes to 1 for the benefit of those listening via YouTube. Those in favour were definitely myself, I know that much. Yep. Isn't technology grand? Aha, okay. Those in favour were myself, Mayor Milner, Councillor Brenda Brandis, Councillor Coveney, Councillor Cridland, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Navard, Councillor Prendeville, Councillor War. Those against were Councillor Choi. All right, now we're really moving to item 10.4.6. Councillor Prendeville, you still happy to move that? Councillor Coveney, still happy to second that? Would either of you like to speak? No. Apologies, Councillor Brenda Abandris. Back with you. Please feel free to ask your question, and thank you, councillors, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So just a question with regard to the significant variance analysis, so attachment E. The total capital expenditure, so May year to date is $10.4 million expenditure incurred. The revised budget is $15.3 million. So the variance between that is $3.9 million anticipated expenditure for the month of June. Could I just ask with regard to the budget phasing, was that planned to be such a capital intensive month, June, for $3.9 million, or is that just phasing that's been adjusted in light of underspends throughout the year?
Mr Lecoq, can I send that your way?
So, through the chair, you may be reminded that when we did the mid-year budget review, we highlighted that phasing has been adjusted to the best possible estimates that we have available at that time. And traditionally, a significant amount of projects reach completion in the last month of the financial year. That also allows for accruals, etc., and quite a push of expenditure to come through.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. So just to understand, so of the 15.3 million for the entire year, 3.9 million is phased for quite substantial activity in the month of June. So are we planning to incur a lot of additional work in June? We're already at the end of June. And deplete the variance, or are we expected to get a larger variance for June month in addition to the 11 months May year to date?
Mr Lecoq.
Through the Mayor, it's a difficult question to answer because there's many factors that impact on the last month in the financial year. So, for example, if there's supply shortages or there's a lot of rain, all those things impact on project delivery. And then also there is projects that effectively ended up being budgeted for in the new budget. An example would be the change rooms that we've been talking about that are federal government funded. And I'm not referring to carry forward, I'm referring to rebudgeting. So there's multiple elements that impacts on the construct of the net result that you're seeing, and it's not a singular answer that I can deliver in terms of a contributing factor that results in that outcome that you've seen.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Councillor Brenda Brandis, another question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor, and it follows on from that response. Thank you, Mr Lecoq. So just with regard to the capital budget for 24-25, have we fully budgeted to include items that were not completed in 23-24, or are we anticipating carryovers from 23-24 to then be adjusted maybe through the mid-year review process next year for 24-25?
Mr Lecoq.
Through Mayor, we have not included in this 24-25 budget anticipated carry forwards. It's purely set for the purposes of 24-25. Similar to what we did last year, when we have better visibility of what those carry forwards and carry forward projects look like, we will propose a budget adjustment, I anticipate, in August or September for Council.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Final question. Just with regard to the anticipated underspend in capital, so do we have any indication now as to roughly how much would be carried over or would be savings and not carried over, or maybe not carried over because we've already rebudgeted? Because I thought we did a lot of rebudgeting for 24-25 capital expenditure.
Mr Lecoq.
We haven't spent significant time in analysing that position, and well and truly, like I've previously explained, it's a bit too early to do that due to those factors that I've mentioned that does impact on project delivery.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation? Nope. Does anyone wish to speak in favour? Nope. Well, there's been no debate. There's no reason for Councillor Prendeville to wind up. I'll simply put item 10.4.6 to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. There we go. So that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to item 10.5.1, which is the CEO performance review process and KPI setting. I do note that Mr Bradford has declared a financial interest in this item, so we'll just give Mr Bradford an opportunity to leave the chamber, and then I'll see about a mover. All right, so for the benefit of the recording, Mr Bradford has left the room and so has Councillor Choi. Never mind. We've got an officer recommendation before us. We've got a unanimous committee recommendation before us. There's no amended motions or alternative motions that I've received. Would someone like to move the substantive motion, which is the unanimous committee recommendation? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Councillor Brenda Abrandis seconding. Councillor Coveney, anything to say?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just that we've had a number of workshops or discussions about this. I believe that the CEO gets consulted in forming these new KPIs for the new year, and I support them. It appears the main difference from last year is about increasing a requirement around rec facilities and activation and land utilisation, and we've had workshops, I think, on most of those.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, you're the seconder. Anything to say?
Nothing further, Mr Mayor.
All right. Does anyone wish to speak against the substantive motion and committee recommendation? No? Does anyone else wish to speak in favour? No? There being no debate, there's no need for Councillor Coveney to wind up. I'll simply put the substantive motion and committee recommendation to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous for all the councillors who are in the room. We don't have Councillor Choi with us, but it has been passed unanimously, which satisfies the requirement for an absolute majority. Could someone please get Mr Bradford back, and we'll resume the meeting when he's returned. And welcome back, Mr Bradford. We now move on to the next item to be withdrawn for discussion this evening. That is item 10.5.6, entitled Annual Review of Council Delegations. Once again, I've got an officer recommendation and a unanimous committee recommendation in front of me. I haven't received any amended motions or any alternative motions. Would someone like to move the officer recommendation and committee recommendation? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Someone to second? Councillor Navard, thank you. Councillor Coveney, anything to say?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Navard, anything to say as seconder? No. Is there anyone who would like to speak against the officer recommendation and committee recommendation? No. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favour? No. There being no debate, no need for Councillor Coveney to wind up. I'll simply put the officer recommendation and committee recommendation to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So that concludes item 10 of the agenda. We now move on to item 11, which is applications for a leave of absence. Councillors, I have received a leave of absence application from Councillor Hayley Prendeville for the period of 28 June 2024 to 10 July 2024 inclusive. Does anyone else have a leave of absence application that they'd like to make? Councillor Quidland?
Yes. July, please. And that's all.
Okay. Anyone else? Councillor Ward.
3rd to the 6th. 3rd to the 6th of July, please.
All right, 3rd of July through to the 6th of July inclusive. Anyone else, councillors? Nope. Okay. So I'm about to call for a mover and a seconder that the leave of absence applications received from Councillor Hayley Prendeville for the period of 28 July 2024 to 10 July 2024 inclusive, from Councillor Glenn Cridland for the period of 5 July 2024 to 7 July 2024 inclusive, and Councillor Bronwyn Wall for 3 July 2024 to 6 July 2024 inclusive, all be granted. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor De Souza, thank you. A seconder? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Councillors, does anyone oppose this? Going, gone? Nope. Okay. Then I'll simply declare all of those leaves of absence applications granted and approved unanimously. That brings us to item 12, which is motions of which previous notice has been given. The first one is item 12.1, a notice of motion from Councillor Bronwyn Wall entitled Advertising of Short-Term Accommodation Local Planning Policy. Now, councillors, we have a little bit of an unusual situation here before us because this item has returned to us after being deferred at a previous council meeting, the March council meeting. Debate on the item was adjourned to this council meeting from the 26th of March 2024. Prior to that adjournment, the item had been moved by Councillor Waugh and seconded by Councillor Prendeville. So this motion is already in train. But Councillor Waugh has emailed an amended version of her motion to us. I think that was 7 minutes past 4 this afternoon. And that puts us in a little bit of a tricky situation under the standing orders. So I'm going to ask Mr Adams to guide us through what has to happen next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I think the best way of handling it is that Councillor Waugh needs to move an amendment to the policy that's already in play because it's already been moved and seconded. So it's a live motion. So we'd need to go through the process of dealing with the amendment. And I think there's probably two amendments that need to be dealt with. One is to the policy and then one is to the other part of the motion, which is part 2 of the motion. So that's probably the best way of dealing with it.
All right, so jump in, Mr Adams, if I've misunderstood, but my understanding is the first thing that has to happen is Councillor Waugh would need to move an amended motion changing the policy that's attached to her motion to the new amended policy that came through this afternoon. And once that had been done, there would need to be a mover, a seconder, the usual sort of debate that takes place there. And then I believe a second amendment would have to be moved by Councillor Waugh, and this one would have to be seconded by Councillor Prendeville because she was the seconder. Oh, just agreed. Okay, very good. And that's the one that deals with the change of date in point 2 of the original notice of motion. So with that in mind, Councillor Waugh, did you wish to move a motion amending the text of your draft local planning policy?
Yes, I will, Mr Mayor. I just want to clarify with you first. Given that when the motion was first moved in February, I didn't speak to it, did you want me to speak to it first prior to moving the amendment, or did you want me to move the amendment first and then speak to it after?
Probably not necessary. It's been moved, it's been seconded. I suppose you could give your reasons for the original February if you wanted to, but I'm assuming at least some of that has changed now.
It doesn't make a big difference, so I'll just move that amendment. So the first amendment is in relation to the short-term rental local planning policy. You'll see the document that I've circulated to everybody. The amendments are in red line and they are to take into consideration many of the comments that Director Shaw very kindly provided. Do you need me to read through each of the amendments?
The gentleman in the gallery has indicated that that screen's working. Is that the case? No, you can if you want to, but you don't have to. We can see it. All right. So would anyone like to second the amendment of the policy being the one that's we've got in front of us here and is on the screens at the moment? Calling for a seconder. Councillor Credland, Councillor Waugh, remember that we're doing the amended motion now, so this is your opportunity to give the reasons for the amendment.
There is a second amendment, which is the actual motion itself, and it's just the item 2 being the date changed from May 2024 ordinary.
That's right, but our standing orders
To
don't allow us to consider 2 amendments at a time. We've got to resolve 1 amendment and then we can move on to the second amendment. So the floor is yours to give the reasons for the amendment of the text of the policy, if that makes sense.
Sure, thank you. So these amendments are fairly minor in nature, but they are taken into consideration. As I said, the amendments proposed by Director Shaw in her comments. I went through them this afternoon with the town planner, and we made those amendments. So those are the reasoning behind that.
Thank you. Who was the seconder? Councillor Credland. It was. Councillor Credland, anything to say as seconder?
Nothing.
All right. Does anyone wish to speak against the amended motion? Remember, it's not the substantive motion, it's the amended motion that's changing the text of the policy itself. Anyone to speak against? Councillor Choi? Fire away.
Sorry, this is a question. I'm not speaking for or against at this point in time. I just would like to get some clarification from Director Shaw, if I may, on the implications of these amendments. And is it all the amendments that, because I obviously haven't had time, given the time that we received these amendments, whether it actually does address all the concerns that your team outlined to council previously?
Ms. Shaw?
Do we need time to look at that? Do you need time to look at it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have had a quick review, noting that I had a look at it at 4:30. I do probably have a few comments, but again, just noting that I haven't had a chance to go through it in full detail, so there may be things that I may have missed. Some of the concerns that I can probably see, there's still references to the municipal heritage inventory. So one of the references was modified, but there's a second part in the all other zones section that would need to be rectified as well. In terms of the land uses themselves, it's part of the same issue as before, where we already know now, based on the draft regulations, that it would introduce hosted and unhosted land use definitions into the deemed provisions, whereas the draft policy still refers to the current local planning scheme 7 land use definitions related to holiday, home and accommodation. Councillors would be aware that in the bulletin I'd noted that we would be required and directed by the department to do a scheme amendment to remove those land uses from local planning scheme number 7. So we're still expecting that to occur in August. And probably one of the only other ones that I had noted was that in the reference to a development approval is to include the following conditions, and it refers to short-term accommodation effectively being able to be rescinded by the city if the applicant hadn't complied with the management plan or there was a breach of the code of conduct. There's an existing SAT case between Aznavour and the City of Mandurah, which effectively confirms that once development approval's been granted, there's no ability for the local government to revoke or rescind a development approval. The only way that can actually occur is if the applicant themselves has made an application to amend or cancel the approval. We'd previously considered that in relation to the Interpretations Act as well. There is a section in the Interpretations Act that relates to applying general provisions over inconsistent provisions. Given these provisions relating to the applicant being able to amend or cancel approval are in the deemed provisions, which the Head of Powers Planning and Development Act, that would take precedence over Section 3 of the Interpretations Act. So we wouldn't be able to use that to otherwise get around the fact that we can't rescind an approval. So the reference to the city being able to do that and imposing that as a condition would need to be deleted. But as I said, I haven't had a chance to go through the whole policy.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Councillors, is any, Councillor Coveney, question or speaking for or against?
Just a question, thank you, Mr Mayor. So to the extent there are any inconsistencies, can those individual inconsistencies be severed and the balance of the policy apply, or does the whole thing become void?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's not that it becomes void because we can still apply local planning policies. It's more the fact that when the department directs us to amend our scheme, this policy only applies to the land uses that are specified in the policy and they'll no longer exist. We'll remove them from our scheme and we'll have new unhosted and hosted short-term rental accommodation land uses. So at that point in time, the policy would effectively apply to nothing and we would then need to amend it to refer to the new land use definitions.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, Councillor Coveney, a question or speaking for or against?
Question, just because I'm a bit confused about procedurally how this works. So if, for instance, council passes this amendment, then it still comes for debate substantially if we approve it. So it's purely about if we adopt the amendment to the original.
That's right. So what we're debating at the moment is the first amendment to the original notice of motion that was put forward by Councillor Waugh in February, then deferred to March, then deferred to this meeting. This amendment is taking the policy that was published in those agenda documents and replacing it with the text of the policy in the handout that we got very recently. If this were to pass, then the old text of Councillor Waugh's draft local planning policy gets replaced with this text, but that doesn't mean that we've approved the local planning policy. It's still got to come back as a substantive motion to council. Irrespective of whether or not this amended motion passes, which will determine whether or not at the substantive we vote on the old version of Councillor Waugh's policy or the new version of Councillor Waugh's policy, we're still going to have a second amended motion to change the reference to May appearing at paragraph 2 of the amended motion to September. Once amended motion 1 and amended motion 2 are both dealt with, then we'll come back to the substantive motion, which will be, do we pass whatever version of Councillor Waugh's policy that we have, depending on the outcome of amended motion 1, do we pass that as a new local planning policy? Does that make sense to everyone? I appreciate it's a bit of a convoluted process. Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just briefly speaking in favour of what's before us, councillors should have an opportunity to put their best case forward. Councillor Waugh thinks that this is her best case and it's the current case, so let's hear it.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against amended motion 1? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
I've just got a couple of questions, Mr Mayor.
Fire away.
Okay. Just with regard to a couple of these amendments, so firstly, the removal of the proposal of the zone within 200 metres of the old mill site, just wondering about the process for removing that and why that was removed.
Ms Shaw, and again, I'd forgive you because you've only had this for about an hour and a half before tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The advice we provided on that previously was that there were no zones that were listed in that section that were actually within 200 metres of the old mill site.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Director Shaw. And just a second question with regard to definition. So the definition of family's been amended. So could you just provide some comments as to what the implications might be of that, or is this amendment a more appropriate modern definition?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think I have probably two responses to that. I'm not sure where else within the policy family is referenced, but again, I haven't had a chance to go through, so I'm not sure whether it needed to be defined. But in any instance, I think it would be quite difficult for the city to actually confirm that an applicant or an occupant met the definition of a family, because we wouldn't be, undertaking planning compliance to determine whether there was a marriage certificate or. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Director Shaw. And just a follow-on question with regard to that definition. So I see the amendment here includes a group of 2 or more persons related by birth, marriage, adoption, or who otherwise reside together as a family unit. Would this include de factos or any other type of family that could be created? But this definition, it seems quite tight.
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm sorry, I wouldn't be able to answer that. I'm not sure from the definition.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the first amended motion, being do we replace the old version of the policy with the new version of Councillor Waugh's policy? I'll say a few words. I'm going to support amended motion 1. I agree with Councillor Coveney. Councillors should be able to put their best foot forward. That doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily support the substantive, and in fact, I will take this opportunity to foreshadow the suggested officer recommendation appearing at page 98 of the agenda. But as far as this amended motion goes, I'm happy to support it. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against? No. Councillor Waugh, I don't think anyone expressly spoke against it, but if there was anything that came up in questions that you'd like to rebut or address, now's your opportunity.
Sure, just 2 things. The first thing is in respect to you, Councillor Brandis. The definition of a family, Director Shaw had said that the previous definition was inconsistent with the Council's adopted access and inclusion plan. So that was the reason for that amendment, and I can tell you that as a lawyer that does include de facto people. So, and the second one was I did notice that there was a question asked in respect to the policy and whether it would continue to apply, and there was some issues related to potential scheme amendments. And just in that regard, I'd just like to say that we did manage to bring in a whole new scheme and not amend a single policy in the process. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Okay, so just to waypoint this as best I can, I'm about to put amended motion number 1 to the vote, and that is what we're voting on right now, is do we allow the amendment of the text of the local planning policy being proposed by Councillor Waugh? A yes vote means we adopt the new version for consideration as a substantive. A no vote means we stay with the version that was published in the February, March and June agenda papers. So hopefully that's clear for everyone. I'm putting amended motion 1 to the vote now. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Now, and I'll invite Mr Adams to jump in if I'm going to make, well, I might actually just let Mr Adams jump in, period.
So the next amendment is really only a minor wording change, so it really only needs the agreement of the seconder for that amendment to be affected.
Thank you, Mr Adams. So, Councillor Waugh, just for the sake of complying with the standing orders, can I get you to read what the amended motion 2 is? My understanding is it's just changing the reference to May to September, but it's your motion. I'll let you do that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, this amendment is in relation to the motion point number 2, that a report to council on the above be presented no later than, and removing the word May and inserting the word September 2024 ordinary council meeting. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillor Prendeville, you were the seconder of the original substantive motion. If you're happy with that amendment, we don't need to debate this amended motion. Are you happy with the amended motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
All right, great. So we've gone through both amended motions. We're now returning to the substantive. The substantive motion, for all intents and purposes, is what's in the most recent amended motion that Councillor Waugh has presented to us. It has already been moved, it has already been seconded, but I don't think Councillor Waugh got around to giving her reasons back at the February ordinary council meeting. So, Councillor Waugh, if you would like to give your reasons for the substantive motion now, now's your opportunity.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So this policy adopts the outcome of the 2019 parliamentary inquiry and subsequent recommendations in respect to short stay accommodation. I'm going to address you all this afternoon in respect to 4 reasons as to why I urge you to support this motion. Firstly, housing supply and a housing crisis. Secondly, the impacts to community. Third, the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act is here now. And finally, community. So first, the housing supply in South Perth is critical. The 2019 inquiry was drafted in a time when the housing crisis was not even as critical as it is now. Back then, it was estimated that there were 20,000 Airbnbs within Western Australia, and there can be no doubt that there are significantly more than that number now. These are homes that are vacant and available for tourism, and the majority have been taken away from what was residential housing. Put simply, not only are Airbnbs and short-term rentals removing accommodation from our residential housing, but they are driving up prices by removing long-term rentals from the market, places where our families can live. In short, they are making South Perth inaccessible to people who want to live, work and play here. All around the world, this issue is being recognised. For example, in New York, spreading throughout the USA, short-term rental accommodation uses are being restricted to ease housing pressures. It's also happening in the UK, and last week I saw an ABC report that Barcelona now plans to shut all short-term rental accommodation by 2028 to tackle the housing crisis there. This issue is being recognised worldwide. But we don't need to be that drastic. We must take action and take steps to ensure there are appropriate locations of Airbnbs so that we don't find ourselves in the position that other cities have found. We must do it for our families and our children, and to preserve the residential amenity for our residents, our voters and our community. Secondly, the impacts are all well documented in the Parliamentary Inquiry report, and they are problems that affect the amenity of our neighbourhoods. Problems such as doors slamming at all hours of the day and night, lights turned on, music played, trash left out, and transient visitors that come and go from Airbnbs. The inappropriate land uses where persons never stay for long enough to care about the neighbours or to contribute to the fabric of our community. One of the main outcomes of the parliamentary inquiry was the requirement to introduce locational characteristics to short-term residential accommodation developments. And this is precisely what this policy does. It ensures that Airbnbs are located in areas of tourism or within and around neighbourhood centres or activity centres. This includes Angelo Street, Preston Street, the area on Manning Road opposite Curtin University as neighbourhood centres, and Mill Point and Canning Bridge as activity centres. In addition to being drafted in accordance with the parliamentary inquiry, it's also consistent with the DPLH guidelines that also highlight locational characteristics and tourism zones as being appropriate for Airbnbs. Third, in April, the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act was promulgated. It requires that short-term rental accommodation register to be set up by the 1st of July and that it will be mandatory for all providers to be registered by the 1st of January. The state have already set the direction. They have produced an inquiry report and they have produced guidelines. They have enacted the Act. They have made it clear that appropriate locational criteria should be set by local governments. This policy is consistent with that advice. There are presently some 400 short-term rentals advertised within our district, and so far we have 3 approved. It has been suggested that we wait again until new regulations are promulgated that will exempt certain types of short-stay accommodations for limited periods of time, up to 90 days. In this regard, I can say 3 things. First, when a development is exempt, it is not considered against a policy. Second, policy only needs to be given due regard when assessing applications. A waive, if you will. It is not binding and it does not remove discretion. Third, the advertising of a draft policy are effectively guidelines as to how discretion is to be exercised. It is never intended for a policy to be exhausted, but more of a guidance statement. Advertising policy is for the purpose of receiving community feedback. We can then make an informed decision. So, as a lawyer having advised local governments for over 10 years, and I was again in the Supreme Court just last week on planning matters, I can tell you with confidence that the amendments to the regulations will have little, if any, impact on the policy that I have proposed, which at its heart is just about identifying appropriate places where short-term rental should be located.
Councillor Ward, that's 5 minutes. I'll move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes. Councillors, Councillor Choi, thank you. Councillors, can we please cast our votes on whether Councillor Ward is granted a further 5 minutes to speak? And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors, and please continue, Councillor Ward.
Thank you. The amendments to the regulations is not a basis for which we should defer passing a short stay accommodation policy. In fact, the regulations have already been amended 3 times this year. To the contrary, we are now looking at up to 400 Airbnbs to be approved by the 1st of January, and I would like a policy to be in place as soon as possible to enable appropriate discretion in decision making. If we defer the motion again, we are risking any future policy with locational criteria being fairly ineffective, as we will be too late. And finally, I ask you to support this motion for our community. When I was outdoor knocking in December of last year on this very issue, I did not find a single resident supportive of Airbnb. When I inquired as to why people didn't submit deputations or submissions to council, I was told that they didn't want to publicly say they were against it for fear of upsetting their neighbours. The concern for neighbours within our community makes me very proud, and it is this very community spirit that I am seeking to protect. I want our community to represent a vibrant community of interconnected people where neighbours know each other and where people talk to each other. And this doesn't happen where there are transient neighbours. The benefits of strong community and neighbourhood fabric are well documented, from reducing crime to supporting schools, sporting clubs, and even a supportive community to positively impact on mental health. It is in this vein that I want to support our community to stay close-knit, to reap those benefits and to have confidence in us, their elected members, to have their best interests at heart. I want our residents to know that their home is our priority, and we will take such steps as we can to protect their neighbourhoods. And by doing this, we can then look to the activation of precincts without threatening the security of their knowledge that residential zones will remain residential, free from interference from conflicting land uses. I put my hand up to council because I wanted to help build and to protect my community. And with appropriate policies, we can protect our residential areas and then proceed with the activation of precincts without risking disruption to our residents. Some of you may note the officer's comments and recommendations, and I take this opportunity to thank the officer for the time and consider those in detail that she has, and I'm grateful for her input. You will see that I have made amendments to the policy in line with her comments. I also note that the City of Belmont has passed its short-term rental accommodation policy in February, and I understand it is in effect right now. We, as one of the most affected inner suburban local governments, have the opportunity to be leaders, advocating for our community and protecting our residents. Councillors, this is not the time to wait. The amendments to the regulations will have little impact, if any, at all on this policy. Waiting for a law to be enacted is one thing, but waiting for amendments to regulations to ensure that our local government is properly governed is, in my view, inappropriate. I consider that waiting is a higher risk because we are likely to receive an influx of development applications prior to the 1st of January. We ought to implement the appropriate frameworks now. Once an appropriate policy is in place, I consider that it would be appropriate for us to then expand upon the delegations to enable approvals to be made at the officer level. And finally, I note that we presently have over 90 policies in place. Policy frameworks are intended to be implemented and adapted readily and easily to be responsive to the needs of the community. If there is ever a time to be responsive, it is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Councillor Prendeville, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to agree with a few of the things that Councillor Ward has said. We are in a sort of housing crisis at the moment and we need to do what we can. I understand that short stay accommodation has effects and negative effects on neighbourhood amenity and community. I did have questions for the administration, if I may.
Far away.
Can the substance of this, the current policy that is written here, and I suppose I just want clarity about any sort of negative financial implications on moving forward with something like this, and then amendments that might come in from the regulations for us changing it and re-advertising. Does that make sense?
I think so, but Ms Shaw, I'm sure she'll ask you for clarification if she needs it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the cost for the city to prepare and undertake advertising for a local planning policy, we can absorb that in the existing budget because it's primarily staff time. It's about 5 days worth of staff time over different business units, and that's associated with things like the graphic design, preparing FAQs, back of house on the website and things like that. There's then additional staff time following advertising to prepare the schedule of submissions and the report back to council. And then when we need to make the amendments and re-advertise in light of changes, then that process would repeat again. But it wouldn't require a separate allocation from council through the budget because it's just part of staff time.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Another question, Councillor Prendeville? No? Okay. Councillor Coveney, speaking or asking a question?
Ask some questions, Mr Mayor.
Of course.
I just want to clarify this 5 days of staff time. So is that a handful of people working on this full-time for 5 days, or is that sending a few emails and doing some tasks for an hour or two over a 5-day period?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That's full-time, 5 days.
Councillor Coveney.
Thank you. And what's about the number of staff members we're talking at being out of action, focusing on this for the full 5 days?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd say probably 5 or 6 from different business units, so from strategic planning and from marketing and comms as well.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Any further questions, Councillor Coveney? Yes? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to confirm it's the case that from 1 July, being in about a week, short stay accommodation providers will need to register by 1 January 25, and the number of short-term rentals that are currently estimated to be in the city of South Perth that aren't registered.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the registration scheme itself opens on the 1st of July, but it's not mandatory for short-term rental accommodation to be registered until January next year. So anybody that's seeking to have early registration would need to obtain development approval in that respect, but it's not required until January. So effectively from January next year, if you are operating a short-term rental accommodation that's not otherwise exempt under the new regulations, you'd need to obtain development approval to receive the registration number, which you can then use to list on the platforms. And so in that respect, you would still need to go through the same process that occurs now, in that you would need to get development approval for it. The only change, there's 2 changes. The first one relates to the exemptions. So at the moment, short-term rental accommodation was treated as a use not listed, and there are now land uses in local planning scheme number 7 for short-term rental accommodation. So that's how we would assess the application. Once the changes to the regulations come into effect, which introduce the new land uses, we would then consider the development applications under those land uses, and a majority of these applications would likely be exempt under the proposed definitions, but they haven't been finalised yet. But it makes no change in terms of needing to get that registration number and development approval by January next year.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Coveney.
I've got one last question for the time being. If the administration was to put together a policy, how quickly could it come back to us? I know this is looking to, if Councillor was successful, this comes back in September. I mean, could it be as late as the end of the year, in which case we're already at, the end of the year?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The city actually already has a draft policy. We were intending to present it to council as part of our suite of local planning policies that were to be reviewed when local planning scheme number 7 came into effect. The reason it wasn't presented to council was because the announcements were made that there'd be changes to short-term rental accommodation and legislative changes. And that we're since aware that the department will be preparing its own model local planning policy template. So our intention would otherwise be to review the local planning policy template once it's released by the Department of Planning, modify our existing draft, and then present it to council as soon as possible. Because I think, like I mentioned at the last meeting that this was considered, we don't disagree with all of the reasons for updating the existing short-term rental accommodation policy. It's just a matter of waiting to see what happens at a state level to make sure we don't need to go through the process a few times.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, anyone who wishes to speak against the substantive motion? Councillor Coveney?
Sorry, I've still got one more question. I apologise, and it's come from Ms Shaw answering my last question.
All right.
What are the material differences between the draft that the administration has prepared and what's before us at present?
Ms Shaw. And again, I appreciate you've only had the amended version for, not very long.
Yes, thank you, Ms Mayor. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to compare what was provided today with the draft that we have, and in any instance, we would need to be comparing it again against what the department ultimately releases, so there's probably no value in undertaking that comparison at this point in time.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi, did I see your hand go up there?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. I've also got some questions. So look, I appreciate Councillor Waugh's intent in this policy, and I wholeheartedly agree with that intent, particularly in relation to the locational criteria that's been set out. So my question's around that. In the draft policy that the city has already worked on, does that include locational criteria? And if it has, is Director Shaw able to at least recall what that may or may not include in comparison to Councillor Waugh's draft policy?
Ms Shaw, are you in a position to answer that one?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Unfortunately, I don't have our draft policy in front of me. It did include locational criteria, but I don't have the specifics and haven't compared the two. So,
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi?
Thank you, through the chair, to Director Shaw. So if I'm correct in just recalling what you've what you've just, in your response to Councillor Coveney, that the city has drafted a policy, so that could potentially come back to council prior to September.
Ms Shaw?
thank you, Ms Mayor. Yes, so if the department releases their draft template at the start of August, we'll be able to provide it to the August Ordinary Council meeting, but it depends on the timing. So we're waiting to see what the department releases. If it's towards the end of August, then we would provide it to the September Council meeting.
Councillor Choi?
So if that's just a few weeks away, we would then have the ability to compare the city's policy against Council Waugh's policy and amend things or update things such as locational criteria, which I believe is maybe one of the most important parts of this policy, at least from my perspective, and also just recalling what Councillor Waugh has said about that. And with that, and if we do wait just those few weeks, will that make a major difference?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, that is an option, but it will obviously depend on whether Councillor Waugh wants to amend her draft policy to reflect something that the city would otherwise prepare.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the substantive motion? Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just have to be very clear that this is the version that's going to be put. Is that correct?
So what we're debating right now is the latest version of Councillor Waugh's motion and policy.
Good, thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Waugh because she did spend a lot of time with this. She also spent a lot of time consulting with councillors, and for that I'm very grateful. My concern is that we have a city planning department, and it is wise to be using their expertise. Expert knowledge of councillors, I believe, should be applied after a draft policy has been developed. And my other point is that, as well, I believe it is wise to have a level of distance between the policy generation process and the policy review process at council level. And I also think that it is incredibly important when councillors have a particular kind of expertise. I think they should be seen very clearly as separated. So that's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of the substantive motion? No? Is there anyone else? Councillor Coveney?
Mr Mayor, I'll speak in favour. I will say as a preamble that I've got backflipped for and against over the last week pre-seeing these changes, because I think there are merits to both sides of the argument. Ultimately, the motion proposes stronger restrictions for short-stay accommodation. I think that's accepted by everybody that needs to happen. It does take away from the amenity of the area. You've got people coming at all hours of the day. They're less conscious of noise because they're on holidays, and you don't get to know your neighbour, and that's really important to our residents. You do take away housing supply. That's also really important, and they do undercut current businesses. So for me, it's really a risk-reward calculation in my head between what is the risk that you've got 400 unregistered short-stay accommodations coming online from the 1st of July. Is it going to happen in the first week? Is it going to take 6 months, 12 months for them all to come online? I don't know. And of course, the risk is there things in this that will require it to be re-advertised? I mean, at present, it appears that's an unknown. So to some degree, we are boxing its shadows. And I accept that it's not ideal to use admin time where that can be avoided. But I do think that the residents of our city are looking to us to show leadership in this space. This is really important to them, especially, I can say, in the suburb of South Perth. People move here for a reason. We've all got lovely neighbours. And people, of course, want short-stay accommodation here because of how fantastic our suburb is, because of our foreshore, because of how close we are to the city. So I do think that we are at real risk if we don't do something now in terms of a sort of floodgates argument. So, look, there are clearly arguments for and against. I am swaying in favour.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Is there anyone who, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, question or speaking for or against?
Question, Mr Mayor. Can the administration just please advise whether they are more concerned about the short-term accommodation that will need registration as opposed to ensuring that the policy is approved, taking into consideration department releases and any final amendments?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it's probably twofold, because on one hand, we do have all of these existing short-term rental accommodation operators, but the other factor that needs to be considered is that the vast majority of them will be exempt under the state government's reform, so up to 90 days. So we won't be receiving development applications for the vast majority of these, or whether they do need development approval, the operators might then choose to only operate for up to 90 days just to make sure that they don't need development approval and registration. So that's one side of it. In terms of the drafting of the policy and ensuring it's consistent, I mean, that's my personal preference. I think it's good practice to make sure that that policies are reviewed and put forward to the community in such a way that it doesn't require detailed amendments or further changes at a later date. I often find that where re-advertising is required as a result of significant amendments, it can create some level of confusion in the community, or a lack of submissions being received the second time it's been advertised, because submitters often think that they have already provided a submission, but the administration can only consider submissions that have been received during the course of the advertising, notwithstanding that a prior submission may have been received on an earlier version of a policy. So, yeah, our preference is to make sure that it's the best possible policy moving forward before council resolves to go out to advertise.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. I guess I'll ask a question at this point, because it has been a long night. We have had a pretty heavy agenda, and the process that we've had to follow to get to this point has been pretty convoluted. Ms Shaw, again, I appreciate you haven't had the current substantive motion, the current version of the policy for very long. Do you consider, bearing in mind that you haven't had enough time to really sort of go through it, as I know you'd ordinarily like to, do you think that there's a risk that if council were to pass this amended policy, that we will have to go down the re-advertising path after the state government gazettes the amended planning regulations?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, even on the basis of the land use definitions that we know will be removed from local planning scheme number 7.
Thank you very much. Councillors, is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against? I think Councillor Brenda Brandis was first there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that this is actually a very important local planning policy, but based on the discussion tonight, I won't be supporting it at this point in time. I am highly concerned that the administration have actually not had sufficient time to actually conduct a review and to not provide the advice through to council with regard to what's before us. I'm also concerned that amendments that may flow through from department releases are going to have a considerable impact on the additional work required of the administration that is already quite busy. So I think firstly and foremost, we don't have a significant enough concern to approve this tonight. We should actually provide good governance and make sure that we actually receive full releases from the department with any amendments that we could actually incorporate into one version and avoid further confusion out in the community by providing an initial release and then an amendment and then a second release. The segregation of duties is quite important with regard to this process as well. So the administration are quite important in the process to make sure that they present us with something to review and consider, and for those charged with governance, the council, to actually provide that governance process. So I think there is a two-part to this process, and thank you, Councillor Navard, for actually raising that as a concern. Based on this tonight, I won't be supporting this motion. I think we need to actually give it due care, due time. There is nothing that is so compelling with regard to those pieces of accommodation that are actually already out there that are going to make a big difference for us in a matter of weeks. So I will not be supporting this motion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of the substantive motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Choi, a question or speaking?
Still got some questions, please, Mr. Mayor. So I'm hearing that when regulations come out, that the policy then has to be re-advertised. Is that correct? And if so, how often do the regulations get changed, and how often would this policy need to be put out for advertising each time?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The regulations, it depends on what the state government is trying to achieve, but this is the only planning reform agenda related to short-term rental accommodation. So I can't imagine that the regulations would be modified again to include any changes that would otherwise impact a short-term rental accommodation policy.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and through the Chair to Director Shaw. So with regards to, I think, some of the deficiencies in the Amendment 2 motion we've got in front of us that I think Director Shaw highlighted earlier on when I asked that question about the current amendments in front of us to this draft policy. So this, if Council endorses this amended motion as is, this is what gets put out for public advertising, regardless of the views, the feedback that the City gave just earlier on with this item.
Ms Shaw?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct.
All right. Further question, Councillor Choi?
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just carrying on from that then, so what are the implications of that then if there are certain elements that the City believe are deficient to the point where, I'm not sure whether I'm going with this, I'm getting a bit tired, but I hope Director Shaw understands what I'm getting at here. Like, what are the implications of that?
Just to clarify for the benefit of the tape and the council, Councillor Choi, are you asking what are the likely consequences if we pass the substantive motion before us, that's Councillor Waugh's most recent policy, and it appears that it's not congruent with the planning regulations when the state government gazettes them? Is that what you're asking?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And also, sorry, I'm just also trying to recall what Director Shaw said earlier about certain deficiencies, and I think she was alluding to some parts of it may even not be possible to implement.
I'm sorry, I've called you Councillor twice now. Ms Shaw, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some of them are minor and they could be dealt with post-advertising. So, for example, where there was reference to municipal heritage inventory in another section in the policy that hadn't been rectified, that could be tidied up. But then I have more concerns with the things like referring to the fact that you can rescind a development approval, which I don't believe you can lawfully do. But again, I haven't had a chance to go through the whole policy in detail to look at anything else. We would do that during advertising. And if there was anything else that needed to be rectified, we would provide that in the report to council post-advertising.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favour of the substantive motion? No. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak against? Councillor Choi?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I, like Councillor Coveney and probably other elected members here, I have toed and froed with this draft policy each time it's been presented. And as I've said already, I 100% agree with the intent. If there was no other planning policy already drafted, already around the corner, in just a few weeks be presented to council, then I'd be 100% wholeheartedly in on this policy, putting it out for advertising to the public. And I understand it's only for advertising. I understand it can come back and we can tweak it again. But then I have to think about, well, the costs, the resources expended, are we going to be sitting around here again for a lengthy period of time trying to fix up a policy that is still deficient and then having to put it back out again to the public? I'm not 100% sure. What I'd rather do is wait for the city's policy to come in a few weeks, and hopefully it is a few weeks, it's not delayed. Because I do think this is a really important policy that we need to have in place pronto. And I would like the benefit of having that draft policy and putting it side by side with Councillor Waugh's policy, particularly in relation to the location criteria, which I believe is really important. We want appropriate short-term accommodation in appropriate places in our city. So for that reason, I'm going to wait a few weeks. Hopefully, if council, whether council endorses this motion or not, but if I had the benefit of waiting a few weeks and doing that, then that's what I'd prefer to do. So that's the way I'm going to go. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillor Coveney, question? You've already spoken, so I assume it's a question.
One question. What's the latest in which council could get something from the administration?
The latest or the earliest?
The earliest.
Right. Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So again, it depends on the timing from the department. So they've publicly advised that it would be August that we would receive a draft, but they haven't said whether it's the start of August or the end of August. So if it's the start of August, then we can have it back to council for the August ordinary council meeting. But if it's towards the end, just based on the agenda timeframes, it would be September.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, Councillor Prendeville, you've spoken, so you can ask a question. No? Okay. Councillors, does anyone else who hasn't already spoken wish to speak either for or against the substantive motion? No. Okay. I will say a few words. And I appreciate it's late, and I appreciate it's been a pretty convoluted item. Like I think everyone that's spoken, furious agreement on the intent. Absolutely. I don't think anyone, I'm not aware of anyone being against the intent of this. For 4 months now, the advice from our officers has been consistent. Everyone agrees that an updated local planning policy will be required for the short-term rental accommodation properties that are actually going to require development approval. Remember, a lot of them won't, but some will. The City Administration has consistently advised Council that it intends to defer the review of the current short-term accommodation local planning policy until the State Government's amendments to the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes regulations have been finalised. Now, the reason for that is, if they change, and we've already approved our policy, we're going to have to go through the re-advertising process because it'll be obsolete when the new regulations come through. I really do think that was the right advice back in February, and subsequent events have reinforced that view, at least for me. The officer report set out a range of issues with the previous version of the policy, and it seems that, and bearing in mind that Ms Shaw has not had very long to consider the amended policy, but it does seem like the advice we've heard tonight is that the City Administration considers there are still problems with this amended policy. I do appreciate Councillor Ward's making amendments. I do appreciate her taking on board the officer comments. I think that's good. But those amendments were emailed through at 7 minutes past 4 p.m. today. We've had a particularly heavy agenda with, I think, 5 in the end, separate amended motions to get across at short notice. And with the best will in the world, I have not had a chance to get across what the current substantive motion actually is. And perhaps more importantly, I'm not across which of those issues, I know Ms Shaw has articulated some, but which of those issues that have previously identified by the City Administration and which still remain outstanding. And I strongly suspect I'm not the only elected member who is in that boat. I am aware that if we were to pass this current version of the local planning policy, it seems that we will inevitably have to go through the same advertising and consultation process once the state government's amendments to the planning and development local planning schemes regulations have been finalised. We've heard that that's likely to take about 5 days' worth of staff time from various business units. There's not an insignificant opportunity cost here, but there's also the risk of reputational damage. As Ms Shaw has noticed, if we carry the motion that's before us right now, the City will have to advertise that proposal out to our community. Our residents will be given the opportunity to lodge submissions on what they think of that advertised policy. The City will then compile and present those submissions to Council before sending the possibly modified policy back to Council at the next practicable Council meeting for approval. Now, this is all going to take up staff time and capacity, but there's also likely to be a fair bit of confusion in our community about why the City is advertising a new short-term rental accommodation local planning policy so soon after the previous proposal. It's obviously not an efficient use of City resources, but we also run the risk of our community not making submissions on the new policy, the policy that is ultimately going to be effective for most of, well, I assume a pretty long time, because they will have assumed that they've already made submissions on the original policy that I think will become obsolete after the new amendments to the planning regs have been gazetted. That's going to undermine the benefit of the consultation process with our community. In any event, I'm really uncomfortable with drafting policy on the fly. I don't like it. Without commenting specifically on the merits of this proposed amended policy, drafting policy on the fly is rarely good governance, and it does heighten the risk of suboptimal outcomes. I've almost spoken for 5 minutes. Would someone be kind enough to move a motion that Councillor Prendeville, seconded by Councillor Coveney, thank you. If you could please cast your votes on whether I should be granted a further 5 minutes. I won't take up all of it. Thank you very much for the indulgence, councillors. So the previous version of the proposed policy had some problems. I do commend Councillor Waugh for taking the officer comments on board and making amendments, but the advice from Ms Shaw is it's still got problems, and I just haven't had enough time to satisfy myself one way or the other. So in conclusion, the intention behind the motion, very good, support that. Good on Councillor Waugh for bringing it forward and triggering this debate. But that said, and expressly noting that I haven't had an opportunity to give proper consideration to the amended version of the proposed policy, I am of the view that the suggested officer recommendation is the better and the safer, and I think more efficient, way of giving effect to that very good intention. So, councillors, I have foreshadowed the suggested officer recommendation. I respectfully suggest that we dismiss this very well-intentioned but perhaps not optimum notice of motion and support the suggested officer recommendation. That's me. Is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against? Councillor Coveney.
Just a question, Mr Mayor. So are we now voting on Councillor Waugh's motion or the administration's motion?
No. So after everyone who has spoken, who wants to speak on this, what we're debating right now, I'll give Councillor Waugh an opportunity to wind up and rebut any arguments made against the notice of motion during the debate, and then I will put the substantive motion to the vote. The substantive motion is Councillor Waugh's current and up-to-date version of her notice of motion. If that succeeds, well, it succeeds. If it fails, I will be moving the suggested officer recommendation effectively as an alternative motion. So hopefully everyone's clear on that. Is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the current substantive motion who hasn't already spoken? That's a no. Councillor Waugh, you have 5 minutes to wind up and rebut any arguments made during debate if you would like to do so.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So we are now 5 months down the line, and we have had the benefit of 3 separate reports by Director Shaw, which I'm grateful for. The amendments, much has been said about the amendments tonight and receiving them at 4:07, and I do note that there are 6 amendments, of which 3 are very minimal, as in changing neighbour to neighbourhood and changing municipal heritage to local heritage, and removing 2 items and amending a definition. So I don't consider that the amendments are so significant that they are incapable of coming across in a short period of time. But notwithstanding the same, I do appreciate a lot of the comments, and I'm grateful for the debate that we've had this evening. Now, I'm also aware that over the last few months we have actually agreed and passed other policies to be advertised, and I do question whether each one of those policies take 5 to 6 staff full-time for 5 days. However, ultimately, the purpose of this is for community consultation. If there are amendments to be made after the community feedback is received, then those can be made, and provided they do not substantially amend the policy, they can be made administratively without being re-advertised. In respect to the amendments to the regulations, exempt development does not require assessment against a policy, so it is unlikely to have an effect on the policy. 400 Airbnbs in our area, I would say, is a fairly significant concern. In respect to rescission of the development approval, I can say that that is at the discretion of the local government as to whether it chooses to do so, and it does not have to. The second thing I can say is that there is a distinction between development in terms of use and physical alteration of the land. And Director Shaw is quite correct in that when a development approval involving the physical alteration of the land has been granted, it cannot be rescinded. That is not to say that it's the same position when it comes to the use of the land. The DPLH have deferred the amendments. I did speak to an officer from the DLA, and they had confirmed that they had taken my policy and they were intending to use it as a basis for preparing their own template. And finally, I'd just like to close saying that Section 2.7 of the Local Government Act states that the role of council is to determine local government policies. So with this in mind, I have put forward this. And just one final thing is as I said earlier, we recently introduced a new scheme, fantastic scheme, and not a single policy has been amended, and they have all been taken over, including some with inconsistent definitions with other policies, local laws, regulations, legislation, you name it. So with that in mind, I do urge you all to consider advertising this proposal and keep it in context. We are advertising a proposal for public comment. We are getting feedback which will enable us to then either accept or amend the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. So, councillors, I'm putting Councillor Waugh's substantive notice of motion to the vote now. If it succeeds, it succeeds. If it isn't carried, then I'll be foreshadowing, well, I will be moving the suggested officer recommendation. So, Please cast your votes. All right. So Councillor Waugh's notice of motion has been lost, 4 votes to 5. For the benefit of those listening via YouTube, when the screen comes up with who voted which way, I'll read that out. All right, so those who voted in favour were Councillor Coveney, Councillor Cridland, Councillor D'Souza and Councillor Waugh. Those who voted against were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor Choi, Councillor Navard, Councillor Prendeville and myself. So, with that, I said that I would foreshadow the suggested officer recommendation, so I will do that. I'm moving the suggested officer recommendation that appears at page 98 of the agenda. I'll read that out and then I'll seek a seconder. That council notes a draft local planning policy, short-term rental accommodation, will be presented for consideration for advertising following gazettal of amendments to the Planning and Development Local Planning Scheme Regulations 2015 related to short-term accommodation. Could I have a seconder, please? I think Councillor Choi was first there. Thank you, Councillor Choi. I won't be long, councillors. We've probably done this issue to death, to be honest. Again, completely support the intent of what Councillor Waugh put up. I just think that the suggested officer recommendation is perhaps the more efficient, the safer, and ultimately the better way of achieving the end that we all seem to be in furious agreement about. So I won't labour the point. Councillor Choi, anything to say, seconder?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I agree with you, and I believe the city very well understands, as you've already said, the sounds like the rest of council does as well through the debate tonight, the situation for the city's local residents with short-term accommodation. And the city appears to have been ready for some time to attend to it. So let's wait a few more weeks. Hopefully it's not going to be delayed, and let's see what we get presented with then, and then we can always hopefully take the benefits of both what Councillor Waugh presented and what the city have presented, and get the best policy on the table for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the suggested officer recommendation? No. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favour? No. There being no debate, there's no sense in me winding up. I'll simply put the suggested officer recommendation to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Okay, that brings us to item 13, which is questions from members. Item 13.1 is responses. Oops, what have I done? Oh, yes, my apologies. My goodness, I can only plead that it's getting late and I'm getting tired. Quite rightly, it's been brought to my attention that we still have item 12.2, a notice of motion from Councillor Mary Choi, public electric vehicles, EV charging stations. Councillor Choi, if you would like to read your motion, and then I will see about a seconder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, my motion is as follows. 1, that the council requests the CEO to investigate options to permit the provision of electric vehicle charging stations at key city-managed off-street parking destinations to provide convenience and encourage visitation and activations in those areas. 2, investigate options to permit EV charging to be either cost neutral or revenue positive to the city, with users to pay their electricity usage. And 3, provide feedback to council on the above requests 1 and 2 at an appropriate time, but by no later than December 2024.
I'm happy to second that. Councillor Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My reasons for this motion are as follows. 1, the city has indicated and demonstrated in its principal support for the state government's electric vehicle strategy for Western Australia and use of electric vehicles generally, with replacement of some of the city's fleet with EVs and installation of EV infrastructure already commenced and as endorsed by council through the annual budget process. 2, council managed curbside space and off-street car parks provide some of the most visible and convenient locations to install publicly available EV charging infrastructure. However, it is acknowledged the city is not responsible for providing the EV charging infrastructure or power for public use, with this being in the realm of the private sector. The city is, however, able to seek out and or permit EV charging infrastructure at public car parks in key locations throughout the district by way of third-party contract for services. 4. This motion seeks to determine any EV infrastructure interest in the city by external parties, measured against community and commercial benefit, and the potential for a new avenue or opportunity for the city to also diversify its income, which has been raised as a key strategic objective of the council at budget workshops. That's it. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. I don't have much to say. It sounds sensible. I'm happy to support it. Is there anyone that would like to speak against the notice of motion? No? Anyone else who wants to speak in favour? Councillor Cridland.
No, I'm not speaking in favour, and I'm not speaking against. Just a quick question to Director Adams or the CEO. Will you have enough time to get the report by December?
Yes, pardon me, yes, we will. This has been an active topic of discussion with the administration for about 18 months, so we've done a reasonable amount of research and thinking and discussion about it already.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Does anyone else wish? Councillor Coveney.
I just wanted to publicly commend Councillor Choi for this fantastic motion. I think it's really sensible and well put together.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Choi. Does anyone else wish to speak either for or against? No? No debate. There's no need for Councillor Choi to wind up. I'll simply put this motion to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Okay, now we're really going to item 13, which is questions from members. Item 13.1 is responses to previous questions from members taken on notice. Responses to questions from members taken on notice at the May 2024 Ordinary Council meeting can be found in the appendix of this agenda. Item 13.2 is questions from members. Councillors, any questions for the admin? I think Councillor Choi was first.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and these questions were provided on notice. With the DBCA recently releasing their recommendation to the Environment Minister to proceed with the new Wesley Penrose rowing shed development on the South Perth Foreshore Coode Street end, and it appearing from the report that the city agreed to the updated plans, I'm just wondering if the Minister does approve the development following the further public consultation period, will there still be any potential implications for the city, as previously outlined in their original submission, including for like the city's Node 2 plans and new changing places and toilet facility location?
Ms Shaw, can I send that to you?
Yes.
Or Ms Empremo?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So in terms of the response that was originally provided, the city had originally recommended refusal in its statutory recommendation to the department, following which that was presented to the applicant, who provided amended plans to try and address some of the concerns that were raised in the city's submission. That revised application and report is now back out for public comment. The city's in the process of preparing its further statutory recommendation. So we haven't provided whether we support or recommend refusal of the revised plans at this point in time. The report that was presented or is provided on the department's website just reflects the discussion that's occurred to date. So we'll be providing that further recommendation, following which the Swan River Trust will consider the proposal, and there'll be a recommendation made to the Minister for Environment. We haven't had a chance to go through the revised plans in detail yet to see exactly what implications there will be on any surrounding infrastructure. But from face value, looking at it, it seems like there's minimal impact in that respect, and that it addresses some of the concerns we had around increasing the setback and building bulk and the like.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Any further questions for the administration? Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This question relates to the tree preservation local planning policy. Now that the public comment process via your say has closed, from a cursory view of community feedback by the city, are there any informal observations the city might be able to share with us at this point?
Ms Shaw, can I send that one your way?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm in the process of going through the submissions right now. We've received 313 submissions. In terms of submissions that have been received from the city, so from residents within the city, 227, and from outside the city, we've received 86. In terms of the support, there seems to be more support than opposition to the policy, but the actual breakdown of that from those outside of the city compared to into the city is quite different. So we're intending to present a report to the July Ordinary Council meeting, providing a summary and a recommendation to Council on the draft policy.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Does the city use glyphosate or second-generation coagulant rodenticides on the South Perth foreshore, including but not limited to around the lakes, Tonda, Douglas and Hurlingham, and the Black Swan habitat riverbanks?
Ms Amprimo, is that your department?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city does use glyphosate as approved by the APVMA, but I think you're referring to anticoagulants, second generation anticoagulants. Yeah, we do not use those.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Choi.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. My last question for the night. Look, I was thinking, understanding that the council's profile photos and details were to be included in the latest My South Perth Winter Edition publication, and that didn't seem to be the case. And so I'm just wondering, was there a reason for that? Why there's been a change this year with the publications and councillors' profile photos and contact details in the? It was the Peninsulas, now it's the My South Perth now, My South Perth. And whether this could be changed for next year, starting with the summer edition, if we could please have those reappear again, as has always historically been the case.
Mr Adams, can I send that in your direction?
So we now use the website to put the profiles of councillors on, so they're permanently on the website. The My South Perth magazine's about sharing local stories that matter to the community and showcasing the people that make our city a great place to live, work and visit. So we include local news about city projects, initiatives and events, as well as what's happening in people's neighbourhoods. So it's more, we tried to make it a bit more engaging and tried to, we've reduced the number of issues, but we've tried to, make it a lot more engaging for the community. So the first edition obviously was done after an election. So we introduced the community to the newly elected council. So that's why we did it after the first edition. We'll probably do that after the next election, but there's no intention to continually put councillors' profiles in that magazine because we've got them permanently on the website anyway. So,
thank you, Mr Adams. Any further questions for the administration tonight, councillors? No. Okay. All right. That brings us to item 14, which is new business of an urgent nature introduced by decision of the meeting. That's nil. Item 15 is where we would ordinarily close the meeting to the public if there was any reason to do so, but there's not, so we won't do that. And that brings us, to item 16, which is closure. So I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation. It's been a really busy agenda tonight, so thank you everyone for trying to get through it as well as what we did. Thank you to the councillors and to Mr Hindle for bringing me back onto track on the agenda where I had a momentary slip there. That is very much appreciated. Thank you all and good night. Oh, and I close the meeting at 9:27 p.m. Yes, thanks again.